Chapter 409. After the meeting ended, AI Ching assigned tasks, and the others hurriedly left. Only Huaishur, who had no origin substance left, was still lying on the sofa, feeling the weakness of running out of mana. Then, he suddenly had a bold idea. Since he said that it wouldn't matter even if the Stellaris exploded, don't think about it. The vault must be returned to the Fred clan. AI Ching glanced at the guy who was thinking about eating peaches. She knew what he was thinking even if she used her heels to think. If you move fast enough, you can still make it in time to see the demonic Goldbank's dwarves perform the ceremony. In 3 minutes, they will freeze the entire vault and connect it to the demonic Goldbank. At that time, the entire vault will be forced into a sealed state. Unless the 1-year limit expires, even if a natural enemy comes, they won't be able to open it. Tisk, why are they so stingy? Huaishur rolled his eyes and continued to pant on the sofa. A small bottle was placed in front of him. What is this? He propped up his head and looked at it curiously. The thumb-sized bottle seemed to contain 10 or so grams of liquid, but it didn't have much weight. There was also an extremely thin straw inside. It seemed like he could only suck a single drop if he squeezed it tightly. I didn't think that the higher-ups would be so generous. AI Ching said, the origin substance essence extracted from the Silver Sea has no side effects. It can quickly restore anyone's origin substance. For you, 2 drops should be enough. If you take more, you won't be able to take it and the origin substance will go berserk. Oh, the little blue bottle that gamers love the most. Huaishur's eyes lit up. How do I use it? Take it orally, inject it, inhale it, and apply it as you please, but keep your hand steady. Don't spread it outside. AI Ching reminded him. The price of each drop is 8 origin substance crystals. Huaishur's hand trembled, and he almost dropped the bottle on the table. Damn, that expensive? A standard origin substance crystal was 4 ounces, which was only about the size of a finger. The standard exchange rate was 2 million USD, so 8 crystals were 16 million USD. What exactly was in this little bottle? When he realized that he was holding more than 100 million US dollars in his hands, he began to tremble nervously. Finally, AI Ching couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed the bottle and used a straw to draw 2 drops on Huaishur's face. Suddenly, Huaishur felt a warm current spread from his body, as if he was soaked in warm water. When he felt the dried-up origin substance rapidly replenish his body, he couldn't help but blush and let out a groan that could be easily misunderstood. Just as he was about to shout a few more times, he saw the muzzle of a gun right in front of his eyes. It was pitch black and icy cold. He quickly calmed down and shut his mouth. Very quickly, the handgun was returned to his pocket, along with the origin substance that Huaishur coveted. Old leader, don't be anxious. Huaishur blinked his eyes reluctantly. I can't taste it. Can you give me more? If you say one more word, I'll pour the entire bottle into your mouth. AI Ching glared at him, as if she had already predicted that he would embarrass himself. She pulled out a small plastic tube and tossed it into Huaishur's arms. It was an emergency kit that she had prepared beforehand. It was sealed well, and the workmanship was exquisite. The front end of the plastic tube could be unscrewed, allowing the origin substance inside to be squeezed out. Unfortunately, there wasn't much of it, only about 2 drops. That was enough. Huaishur happily stuffed the tube into his pocket, squeezing out an honest smile that said, the leader is so nice to me. All right, stop being so disgusting. AI Ching shook her head. Before I get to work, what's the question? Huaishur was confused. Do you really not have any self-awareness at all? AI Ching sighed. You've been looking at me with that. I actually have a question to ask, but I don't know if it's convenient expression for half an hour. Fine. Huaishur shrugged helplessly. They were too familiar with each other. He couldn't hide anything from her. Is it related to the Stellaris? To be precise, it's related to the mission. Huaishur hesitated for a moment, then asked directly, why didn't you organize an emergency evacuation? Even though it was good to be able to get outside help to deal with the finite society, he didn't understand. Generally speaking, shouldn't they first organize an evacuation when it involved 120,000 people? Why would they go through so much trouble to preserve the Stellaris? It was just a train. No matter how luxurious and expensive the train was, it shouldn't be a problem for the Astronomy Society. Just like AI Ching had said, if it blew up, then it blew up. The Astronomy Society was a large organization. It was nothing more than compensation. When the time came, there wouldn't be anyone else. Wouldn't it be easier to deal with a finite society? AI Ching couldn't help but shake her head, rubbing the bridge of her nose. I should have guessed it a long time ago. You really haven't looked at any of the files or information. How do you do your job as an investigator? Every day I eat, drink, and play games. At night, I have a cup of warm milk, do some gymnastics, and go to bed. Feng Shu said that I'm very healthy. What's wrong? AI Ching suddenly had an impulse to kill this bastard on behalf of the Astronomy Society. She slowly shook her head. You must have a lot in common with Chai Fei. You know this too? Huai Shi was stunned. This kind of shameful thing should be killed. I'll explain it to you from the beginning again. AI Ching sighed, once again understanding his salted fish nature. In the finite society, except for a few high-level priests, other people don't even know that they are members of the finite society. What do you mean? The literal meaning. She said, for many people, they may just have a nightmare at the beginning. They dream of something, and then the next day, they forget about it and continue to live normally. After a year and a half, they will have another nightmare and wake up again. Then the third time, the fourth time, there will be a day when the dreamer will start to doubt whether they are living in a dream or reality. At this stage, the nightmares will become longer and longer, and the time between them will become shorter and shorter. The memories in the dream will become deeper and deeper, gradually eating away at the original personality. At the final stage, the original memories and personality will be worn away by the long nightmares, leaving behind only a walking corpse that worships the rotten dream. This is the state that most of the members of the finite society are in, and the priests of the finite society can even freely control this process. In most cases, they will separate the part of the finite society from the normal part, just like there are two different consciousnesses in the same body. Once the disease is incurable, as long as the priests release the last shackles, they can immediately complete the change of will, from an ordinary person to a fanatical believer of the rotten dream. As she said this, AI Ching flipped open the information in her hands, showing it to Huai Shi. Right now, in the surveillance of the Stellaris, there are a total of 7,000 ascenders and 100,000 ordinary people from various borders, apart from the priests and the management who have been marked as suspects. Who knows how many people are infected and how many have been replaced by the rotten dream. If we rashly evacuate, there will definitely be people who will get away with it. It might even alarm the queen of the rotten dream, making the next operation of the Central Bureau fail. That is why we can't retreat. AI Ching said, not only can we not retreat, we even have to maintain the current state of the train. Once we prepare to make a move, we have to completely wipe them out, or else there will be no end to the trouble. Huai Shi was speechless, screening out the believers of the rotten dream from the normal people in a train full of passengers. Even if they had the help of the Astronomy Association's intelligence agency, this was definitely not an easy task. In particular, they had to maintain the current calm on the surface and not let the priests of the finite society notice anything strange before they truly began their operation. Just thinking about it made him feel like his head was about to explode. Don't worry about other people's business. You just need to complete your own task. AI Ching got up and looked down at the time. Are there any other questions? Huai Shi shook his head. Then have a good rest. AI Ching opened the door and said, tonight may be very busy, and there is no time to rest. Huai Shi saw that she was about to leave and subconsciously reminded her, be careful. AI Ching's footsteps paused slightly. She looked back at him and seemed to be stunned. Soon, she nodded and said, I will. The door closed. Since there was still some time before the mission began, Huai Shi did not intend to waste time. After taking a nap for half an hour, he took off the suit that the manager gave him, folded it neatly, and put into a bag. He changed back to his original clothes and tidied up his belongings before opening the bedroom door. In the corridor outside the door, the old man who was cleaning with a duster turned around. Are you leaving? Yes. Huaisher nodded and returned the suit with both hands. Finally, he handed over a piece of paper. This is my number. If you need it in the future, no need. The old manager shook his head and refused. Fate is always so wonderful, isn't it? Let's look forward to the next time we meet. I still insist that you accept it. Huaisher said, the association is the association, and we are us. Otherwise, I may have to find another way to compensate you for your loss. The old man raised his eyebrows slightly. Soon, he took Huaisher's note with both hands. I will keep it well. He took a step back and bowed to say goodbye. I wish you success. Thank you. Huaisher smiled. He watched the old man and the other decorations in the concert hall turn into phantoms and leave. He took one last look at the bleak room and pushed the door open. In the corridor outside the door, 12 guests who had been waiting for a long time looked up at him. They were wearing a layer of extremely high-tech black armor, and their arms and bodies were covered with a layer of simple and dexterous exoskeleton. Even their faces were covered in a sealed helmet. The edges and corners were sharp. It was as if they were walking steel. Iron Legion, brass squad reporting to you. The leader walked up and saluted Huaisher. His tone was calm and composed. Major Huaisher, following orders, we will assist you as operatives to complete the next mission. May I know your name? Lattice 1 to 1 to Lattice 1 to 12. Code name. Huaisher understood. Other than that, is there anything else you want to tell me? No. Crystal 1 to 1 handed over a box. The commander said that you are free to do as you please. Inside the box was a heavy pistol, but the style was completely different from the ones Huaisher was used to. After pushing out the magazine, he could see that alchemy elementium crystals had been applied to the bullet to ensure that it could be used normally in the abyss. Huaisher weighed it, nodded slightly, opened the safety, and casually inserted it into the holster on the saddlebag. Then let's go. He pulled out the sword of virtue and turned in the direction of the exit. The mission has begun. Chapter 410. The tracks had stopped again. As the train's cabin flipped, they appeared outside a luxurious suite. The gate closed, isolating the inside from the outside. This time, Huaisher saw a few restless figures through the phone screen. They seemed to have received some news and became vigilant. One of them was sitting on the sofa, constantly dialing, but no one answered. Some of them even took out an umbrella-like frame from their backpacks and propped it up. A stream of light spilled from it, enveloping the room. It protected them. The people from the Astronomy Society are here. The man in the red robe raised his weapon and ordered the other stiff believers in the room. Get ready. Fight them. They fervently chanted the drowsy incantation, and the power from the rotten dream blessed their bodies. The believers' bones protruded from under their skin and quickly bent down. In the end, their bodies were covered with barbs, and rotten flesh fell from their faces, turning into something disgusting. Along with Yinshir's warning, there was also a reminder. The remote support system is online. Do you want to apply for use? Why Isorino? Nonsense. Of course it would be yes, yes, yes. Huaisher's finger almost pierced through the screen. Then, he felt a sudden tremor under his feet. He felt the tracks under his feet suddenly push outward by 10 centimeters. Not only that, but the entire upper carriage of the Stellaris began to quickly adjust. Then, with a whistling sound in the distance, Huaisher vaguely saw a container-like carriage rising rapidly through the gaps between the frames. In the process, the steel plate on it quickly fell off, revealing a barrel comparable to a tank's caliber. It quickly locked onto its position and aimed at the luxurious suite. Huaisher pressed down with his finger. The entire container suddenly shook, and dazzling flames spewed out, pushing the red-hot steel and bursting out a low roar in the enclosed space. Crystal 1 to 1 took a step forward and raised the shield on its arm in front of Huaisher, blocking the hurricane for him. But the ear-piercing roar was still about to pierce Huaisher's eardrums. In an instant, the cannonball passed through this fleeting gap, shattered the cabin's planks, broke into the room, and disintegrated inch by inch in midair, forming a diffuse iron light. Thanks to the reflection of the mirror of nothingness, Huaisher could tell that it was thousands of fine iron pieces falling off the cannonball like petals. With the detonation of the explosives, it flew in all directions. The umbrella-like shield was penetrated by the iron rain like tinfoil and easily shredded. Whether it was the priests or the zombies who tried to resist, at this moment, they all turned into bursts of bloody mud, pasted in the devastated room. Huaishi's scalp tingled. In this sealed space, even if Huaishi had a premonition of death, she would not be able to escape from this level of cannon fire. If he went in, his fate would be no different from the other unlucky ones. Crispy skin was so embarrassing, but now was not the time to be in a daze. Huaishi waved his hand and led the Iron Legion into the room. There was no need to break in. The hammer of pain tore down the entire wall. Then he saw a badly mutilated figure trying to get up from the bloodstains on the ground. Deformed eyes opened one after another on his broken body, looking at the attackers ferociously. Then Huaishi rushed up and hammered. With the help of the flame spray, the power of the hammer of pain was applied evenly to the half-dead priest, directly blowing him up. It was over. It was like going on a trip. Happy and easy, finally understanding how convenient it was to have the support of an organization. Huaishi was almost moved to tears. If it were him alone, he would have to fight alone until next year. Now he had manpower, assistance, guns, and cannons. It was so good. Increase the power and don't stop. After smashing to his heart's content, Huaishi picked up the hammer, let out a long breath, and stopped Crystal Lattice 1 to 11 from loading the bomb. I'll do it. He poured a bottle of Ramses' Fury on the ground and threw a pinch of alchemy fire on it. The metal fuel immediately burned vigorously. Under his control, the alchemy fire quickly swept over and spread out as if washing the ground, engulfing all the remaining flesh and blood. Not even a speck of ash was left. Only a piece of iron half the height of a person was left in place, still emitting a blazing scarlet. Done. Leaving the still hot carriage, Huaishi waved his hand. Next, in the process of moving, Huaishi heard the continuous sound of cannons in the distance. It seemed that after the firepower support came online, everyone became happier and happier. With his own eyesight, he could see a steel rope hanging down in the distance. A dozen soldiers on a mission slid down from it, their bodies already dyed blood red. Sensing Huaishi's gaze, one of them even waved at him rather casually and gave him a thumbs up, indicating that he could do it. The iconic horse head had already turned scarlet, as if a Fergana horse had come from somewhere and become a spirit. Huaishi waved his hand, indicating that he could do it too. The two sides crossed each other. But after a few seconds, their trajectory suddenly changed, and the wristwatches on everyone's wrists lit up with a message of a change in mission. Emergency rescue. Prepare to attack. In the blink of an eye, all the members of the Crystal Lattice squad moved forward quickly, protecting Huaishi in the middle. Then, heavy bulletproof shields unfolded from the boxes on their shoulders and arms. After joining with each other, they formed a temporary bunker. After a series of crisp sounds, the machine guns were set up in the slots next to the shields. Scorching steam suddenly spewed out from the armor on their backs. Then, something like 2 hydraulic valves opened, causing their armor to rapidly expand, increase in value, and reach an astonishing thickness. The injection of the liquid elastic defense layer was completed, and the second, third, and fourth power channels opened. The 12 cast iron soldiers instantly completed the transformation from a medium-sized unit to a large unit and entered the attack phase that they were best at. Yensha reminded, "Prepare to eject." "Sir, please grab me." Crystal Lattice 1-1 raised its hand and motioned for Huaishi to come closer. Immediately after, 2 grooves that looked like guide rails suddenly rose from under their feet and were inserted into the interface of the boots, completing the installation. They were ejected directly from the spot. It was like firing a cannonball. Huaishi only felt like he was thrown into a roller coaster. In an instant, a long road flew by in front of him. As the deck shattered, they fell from the sky and smashed into the huge bathtub. Countless splashes of water splashed. He smelled blood. Even if there wasn't enough space, the Stellaris still had a bathtub. The facilities could be said to be luxurious. More importantly, In addition to the countless common services, there were even more uncommon and illegal services that were openly provided here. It was claimed that it could bring customers a heaven-like feeling. But now, it seemed that the customers who should have gone to heaven had taken the wrong bus and instead boarded the Hell Express. They were almost dead. More than half of the dazzling bathtub hall was now covered by countless flesh and blood. Between the thousands of ferocious eyes and the tumor, an old man's figure floated in the air, completely naked. The rotten dream almost solidified behind him, turning into a pair of deformed scaled wings that emitted blazing flames. The attacking soldiers had long been frozen in place. They were fragmented, and bones pierced out of their twisted limbs, growing deformed. At this moment, they had become trees of flesh and blood and pain. Stubborn. As Huai Shi and the others descended from the sky, the naked old shaman raised his scarlet eyes and stretched out a finger. A terrifying wave of air erupted as he raised his finger, smashing into the shields of the cast iron soldiers. The entire formation shook and took a step back. Then, the old shaman raised his hands, and the trees of flesh and blood formed by countless tourists and soldiers began to grow vigorously. Sharp bones and flesh quickly extended, piercing toward Huai Shi and the others. Without waiting for the attack to launch, Crystal 1-to-1 took off the bomb at his waist and threw it forward with all his might. In the intense explosion, the tens of thousands of bone spikes were temporarily forced back. The closed shield opened a gap, and the grenade launcher was raised from it and the trigger was pulled. A whistling sound burst forth. It returned without any success in front of the nightmare wings. A notification popped up on Huai Shi's phone. Hold fast. Emergency deployment of long-range support. Waiting time, 13 seconds. The sound of firing rang out. Without any instructions, the soldiers from the cast iron army indifferently pulled the trigger at the enemy, pushing the shield wall forward step by step. Ridiculous. The old shaman spread his wings and flew nimbly in the air. In an instant, he appeared from behind and raised his palm towards the enemies below. He opened it, and a strange eye quickly formed in his palm and opened. "Send me up." Huai Shi stretched out his hand and pressed on Crystal 1's shoulder. Then, the soldier overlapped his hands without hesitation and suddenly raised them up, carrying Huai Shi's body and flying up. In midair, Huai Shi's body rolled and nimbly adjusted his trajectory. He aimed at the old ghost's palm and pulled the trigger, instantly emptying a magazine. The bullet was blocked by an invisible force in front of the old shaman. It exploded repeatedly, causing cracks to appear in the defense in front of him. Huai Shi had already risen in front of the old shaman. He threw away the pistol that was no longer useful, and the hammer of pain appeared in his hand. He swept it horizontally and activated the flame jet. It smashed down on his head with all its might. 80. Feeling the strange threat from the hammer of pain, the old shaman did not dare to resist it head-on. He quickly retreated, preparing to slaughter Huai Shi after his upward momentum was gone. However, he did not expect that the hammer in Huai Shi's hand would disappear like an illusion and be replaced by a rope that shot out. He was caught off guard and wrapped around his ankle. Huai Shi grinned. He poured an origin form and activated the rope of sorrow. The rope extended wildly and wrapped around his body. It quickly contracted, causing an instant of delay. The burning eyes of the mountain ghost were just inches away. His empty right hand opened, and the sacrificial knife appeared. He held it tightly and stabbed it down, deeply wedged it into the shield in front of him. Then, the drummer. The sound of thunder burst forth, and in a split second, the blade vibrated, destroying the layer of defense as easily as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, deeply piercing into his face. "You didn't expect this, did you, little brother?" Chapter 411. 5 minutes before 6 o'clock in the evening. In the captain's room, Ai Ching silently leaned on the chair that originally belonged to Rudolph as she stared at the huge screen hanging on the wall. "This is a good place." The young man, known as Mr. Fan, paced around the astonishingly spacious room as he looked around. Behind the slowly unfurling face, countless fine steel fragments appeared and pieced together as the pivot turned, covering the young man's face and forming a strange lens like a night vision device that looked around. Under the illumination of the green light, the wall also became transparent, revealing the complex structure hidden behind. Then, I will prepare to connect. He looked back at AI Ching. I'll leave the command to you later. Yes, thank you. AI Ching nodded. Then, Mr. Fan fell on his back. The young man's body had already shattered in midair, and completely illogical mechanical facilities spread out layer by layer from the cracks of the body. Like a swarm of snakes, cables stretched out and slithered on their own, tearing apart the expensive decorations on the floor and walls as they forcibly connected to the control center, combining him and the astral into one. At this moment, a majestic source of origin substance emerged from his soul, carrying his will as it instantly flowed throughout the huge astral. Countless cables, machinery, and equipment, regardless of model, age, or format, were all controlled by Yinshur's stigmata. It was impossible to achieve such a miracle with only the divine armament. But long before that, his other body parts had been scattered in various key parts of the astral by the self-proclaimed driver, Martin Edward. With the activation signal from a switchboard, a total of 16 intruding serial machines emitted a furnace of heat, assisting his will as they turned the astral into Yinshur's body parts inch by inch. A little limit in the captain's room, the divine armament covered in steel spoke in an old voice. Soon, as the personality simulation module went offline, it became a purely mechanical voice. After countless flashes of static on the screen that took up an entire wall, surveillance cameras of various sizes quickly appeared. Initial coverage of the astral is complete. Region detection commencing. Database installation commencing. Mobile command center deployment complete. Soon, the images from the countless surveillance cameras were quickly corrected, filtered, pieced together, and eliminated. A miniature model of the astral was displayed. All of the secret passages, mechanisms, rooms, and even the electrical circuits, water sources, and air filters were taken over by Yinshur, becoming his eyes and ears. He listened, observed, and analyzed. All of the members of the finite association that had been selected from the database were marked on the map. There were a total of 126 suspects. Finally, the mechanical voice calmly reported, "Selection complete." AI Ching nodded. "Has the soul probe finished loading? It can be used at any time." Then load it into the origin substance testing team and analyze it against the rotten dream data, AI Ching said. "Let me take a look at the infection rate on the car." As soon as he said that, a shocking blood-red color spread out from the virtual map, covering almost half of the Stellaris. Zesses. At least 1/3 of the passengers had been infected by the astral dream. The finite association had definitely put in a lot of effort for this operation. They had actually prepared so many seeds of nightmares in advance. Presumably, before they got on the train, there were already thousands of passengers who had been infected without knowing it. Through the explosive infection, the number of infected people had increased by 8 to 9 times overnight. After another night, there would probably be no healthy people left on the train. At this moment, red alerts representing the astral dreams, infection were everywhere, leaving behind the early-stage infected people who still had a chance of recovery. The key parts of the train and the departments were almost everywhere in a shocking crimson color. They were the late-stage infected people who had been completely devoured by the astral dream and had become walking corpses. The new personality formed in the astral dream was hidden behind the subjective consciousness. As long as the bell from the sacrifice rang, it could tear apart the last trace of the host's original consciousness and complete the replacement and devour. AI Ching rubbed her forehead, picked up the phone, and connected to the temporary command center in the rear. "Can the decision-making room send me a red book?" "Don't joke around, Ms. AI." The liaison officer sighed helplessly. At this year's joint meeting, the P5 just limited and cleared the number of documents issued. This year, only one was issued in the Asian region. If you sign it now, The decision-making room will definitely explode. In the present realm and many borders, the Astronomy Association had a lot of great power. Among all these powers, the most eye-catching was the clearance document that could be directly issued as long as it was verified that there was a threat to the present realm. It was a notice of erasing a person from the world. It was a license to kill that was recognized by the whole territory and had legal legitimacy. The moment the seal was applied, the life of the registered person was equivalent to entering a countdown. However, even the clearance document, which represented death, was not treated equally. There were also internal ranks and weights. Although they had awkward and difficult to remember official names, they could also be divided simply and crudely by the envelope containing the document. Black, yellow, red, white. The most common black letter was issued by the inspector after reporting it to the branch. It was issued for individuals who had ascended, and it was sealed in a black document like an obituary. There was no need for a trial and sentencing. It could be directly executed during the operation. The issuance of the yellow page required careful consideration by the branch and reporting to the decision-making room of the command bureau to avoid serious consequences. It targeted an entire organization and a huge family. It was just like the densely packed numbers on every page of a phone book. Once it was torn off, everything recorded on it would be erased and disappear from the world. A red-level clearance document was no longer something that could be written on a piece of paper. This kind of thickness was enough to be bound into a book. The impact of a report that needed to be submitted by the subministerial agencies and approved by the central decision-making room and the local P5 at the same time was too great. A city, an entire family, or an entire border. The moment the central decision-making room stamped the document, the fate of destruction was destined. As for the higher-level white papers, they had only been submitted once in the past 100 years, and it had not been approved. Each white paper brought at least 30 correction points to the present realm. If they were not careful, the whole world would be completely changed. AI Ching naturally did not expect the higher-ups to give her a red book to clean up after her casual remark. She only emphasized the difficulty of the mission once again and left a record in the command center as a form of insurance in advance. Otherwise, who knew what kind of risks and consequences would occur when the finite society decided to fight to the death? After she received another batch of backup quotas from the command center, she decisively hung up the phone and picked up the phone on the table that was already connected to the command channel. She said, "Begin the operation." It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Huaishur and his subordinates pushed open the door, and the corridor under their feet instantly opened to both sides. A transport track rose from the darkness. Then they quickly sank. Like riding an elevator, countless carriages began to move rapidly in the darkness. Sparks flew on the rails as they were pulled by Yinshur's power and moved rapidly. In just half a minute, they quietly arrived at the lower level of Stellaris. The second-class area was naturally the place with the largest number of passengers on Stellaris. There were no individual rooms, but a suite shared by 10 people. Although the bedroom and bathroom were separated, the space was still narrow. Through the floorboards above their heads, they could vaguely hear the noise and running from outside the room. But soon, the faint clamor quickly faded away and disappeared. Action area isolation complete. Carriage number J897, 9 passengers, confirmed as finite society members. Permission to kill issued. Following the message sent by Yinshur, a crisp sound came. The members of the Iron Legion unlocked all the guns in their hands. When Huaishur raised his phone and aimed it at the floorboards above his head, he could see the image simulated by Yinshur's server through the floorboards. A few figures gathered together, kneeling and praying. As if chanting some ancient scripture, the fanatical voices overlapped and spread in all directions. It made people drowsy and fell into a rotten dream bit by bit. "Sir, please give the order." Crystal 1-1 asked for instructions. Huaishur didn't know how to react. It was his first time as a commander, so he didn't know how to sound professional. While waiting, someone seemed to notice that the sounds outside had disappeared. Realizing that something was wrong, he walked toward the door and then found that the door handle couldn't be turned. He froze for a moment and wanted to turn around and shout, "Do it, do it!" Huaisha lowered his voice. He didn't care about professionalism and directly drew his sword to charge. Pooh! There was a soft sound. Half of the person's head exploded into a mass of blood. Then the soft sound didn't stop. The members of the Iron Legion skillfully pulled the trigger and killed the members of the Fine Knight Society on the floorboards. When Huaisha reacted, almost everyone on the floorboards was dead. He was stunned for a long time and awkwardly put the sword of virtue back. He deeply felt that the times had changed. The other side was fighting terrorism. It was obviously inappropriate for him to pull out a sword and fight 300 rounds. Target killed. Crystal 1-1 turned around and said, "Stay vigilant. 1-11 is searching." Thus, a silent soldier directly took out a folding ladder from his back and skillfully climbed up. He smashed open the floorboards, went up, and skillfully shot the body of the deceased with a pistol. Finally, he put an iron box on the wall of the room. Then he slid down the ladder and put away the things. He raised his hand and reported to Huaisha, "Sir, the cleaning is complete. There are no abnormalities." Oh. The dumbfounded Huaisha nodded. "Thank you for your hard work. What's next?" His phone vibrated, and the next mission location was marked. The tracks began to move again, taking them to the next location. After walking for a while, Crystal 1-11 took out a remote control and pressed it. A low muffled sound came from the distance. Huaisha was dumbfounded. How skillful at destroying corpses. It was really an eye-opener. He was originally prepared to bring people up, but he didn't expect that this was a money-farming team. He really came to be the boss. Just as his imagination was running wild, his phone suddenly vibrated. A warning popped up. Chapter 412. The sacrificial knife cleanly cut through the old shaman's cheekbone. With a roar from Huaisha, it suddenly pulled, crushing the old shaman's tongue and piercing out his mouth. Before the shriveled flesh could even bleed, Huaisha pulled out the sword of virtue from the saddlebag on her back while she was in midair. He pressed down on the old shaman's shoulder and stabbed the blade into the old man's neck. It came out from the back of his neck and swung horizontally. Decapitation. A broken and sluggish head flew from his shoulder along with the purplish-black blood. The scattered white hair was dyed red by the blood. But then the headless corpse suddenly moved. It raised its hand and pressed it against Huaisha's face. In the palm, countless tiny eyes opened in an instant, staring at Huaisha's eyes with hatred. Brilliance from the abyss gushed out from it. "You worthless bastards, feel the truth." A torrent of Origin's substance gushed out from his palm like a tsunami, pouring into Huaisha's body along with a sea of nightmares. Huaisha's vision turned black. He immediately felt as if his soul had left his body. It was actually being pushed back by the old ghost. Behind him, a black vortex appeared out of thin air. Countless deformed limbs stretched out from it, pulling Huaisha's soul, wanting to pull him into the deepest part of the rotten dream. Witness the truth. The broken head grinned, accompanied by countless illusions that could only be seen in nightmares, appearing in front of Huaisha. The essence of the abyss and the philosophy of the rotten dream continuously emerged from Huaisha's consciousness, constantly wearing down his will to resist, wanting to deeply take root in his soul. He wanted to turn him into a fallen one of the rotten dream. Receive the gift of the Great Spirit, the lucky one chosen by the good knight. The old face smiled sinisterly. Bid farewell to the decaying world. From now on, you will be my companion, a sober person in this sad world. In a trance, Huaisha felt as if he was swallowed by endless darkness. The world fell apart in front of him, and everything shattered into illusions like a dream. Reality and illusion were reversed, and endless dreams of madness engulfed him. It was just a moment, but it was more than thousands of years. In the prison of endless darkness, the brilliance in Huaisha's eyes gradually extinguished. In the end, only darkness was left. In the endless darkness, only a warm and kind light waited in front of him. Come, come, The old shaman smiled and spread his hands in the light. Embrace the only truth in this world. Accept the supreme redemption from the good night. Before that, let me ask you a question. Deep in her sleepiness and absent-mindedness, Huaishur subconsciously asked, "Does your company provide overtime pay?" The old shaman was stunned. "There should be paid leave, right?" Huaishur asked again, "5 insurances and 1 housing fund? Year-end bonus? Does your company have an exclusive passage? VIP lounge? First-class reimbursements?" Dissatisfaction appeared in his empty eyes. Huaishur asked, "I'm still an artist, so there should be a signing fee, right? What about exposure? Are there any preparations to increase popularity? The trending headlines should be bought for at least a few months, right?" "There's nothing?" He frowned and woke up from the nightmare. He opened his eyes and looked at the hideous wreckage in front of him. "Then you have the nerve to come out and swindle money?" Boom! The hammer of pain was raised, aimed at the old shaman's newly grown face, and smashed down. Blood splattered. Amidst the screams, the palm that grabbed Huaishur burst forth with endless power and threw Huaishur out. He flew like a cannonball and smashed into countless squirming flesh. Stubborn. The old shaman raised his hand again and slowly grasped at Huaishur. But then his hand was smashed. In the self-activated shield array, Crystal 1-1 and Crystal 1-2 had already walked out with their shields. They held a pistol in their hands and moved forward step by step, taking turns to cover. The bullets fired from the pistol were extremely strange. Every bullet that hit the old shaman would explode a bloody hole in his body. The wound couldn't be healed and was sizzling. When he was changing the magazine, he could see the red bullets carved from crystals. Their movements were swift. Under the alternating shooting and cover, they immediately arrived in front of Huaishur. Crystal Lattice 1-1 took out a mountain-splitting axe and cleanly cut off the flesh that was entangling Huaishur. He pulled him up, ignoring the flesh tentacles that were clinging to his arm, and quickly ran away. Soon, Huaishur was dragged back behind the bunker. He turned around and shouted, "Heart-strengthening injection now." "No need. No need, he's still alive." Huaishur coughed and got up from the ground. He casually tore off the tentacles entangling his body and threw them on the ground. In the rain of bullets, the old shaman was already riddled with holes. However, tentacles of flesh and blood continued to extend from his wounds. They wriggled and formed deformed limbs and organs. His original human figure could not be seen at all. Long-range attack in position. Yinshur's mechanical voice sounded in the channel. "Prepare for impact." A roar burst out, the ceiling cracked, and a pungent smell instantly spread out. A torrent swept across. Water poured in from the ceiling like a waterfall, making Huaishur look up in shock. The corner of his eyes twitched. It was all alchemy fuel. Once it was ignited, it would be enough to send them to the sky. This was the rhythm of a heroic sacrifice. Following the roar, behind the gap in the wall, far away, the artillery module quickly descended on the rail. But this time, there was a figure beside the cannon. Andrea. The scholar from the ivory tower put his hand on the cannon next to him. He raised his finger and gestured a pistol in the air. An invisible trigger was pulled. "Byung," she whispered softly. The next moment, a spark burst out from the alchemy fuel out of thin air and instantly turned into a mournful frenzy. In the dazzling fire, the endless flow of flames was restrained by an invisible force. All the alchemy fuel evaporated in an instant and turned into a part of the terrifying temperature. All the heat was violently stimulated and tightly bound in that narrow space. It formed a blurry figure. It was as if the god of the flames had descended. Under the control of thermodynamics and salamander, Andrea straightforwardly expressed this destructive power clearly. As the flames swept across the area, nothing was left behind. Whether it was the old man who kept regenerating the corroded flesh on the wall, or even the insignificant things in the hall, they were all buried in the sea of fire. In the end, as the flames shrank, only the tower emblem of the ivory tower was left. It burned fiercely, proving that everything had just happened. Fleischer took a deep breath and turned around to wave at Andrea to thank her. Andrea also winked at him. As the artillery module rose into the air again, it went to other places, until the old man's bones disappeared. Crystal 1-1 staggered back 2 steps and sat on the ground. He raised his hand weakly and signaled for help. Fleischer immediately took out the sacrificial knife and cut open Crystal 1's broken gloves and cuffs. The tentacles of flesh had already torn his armor and sank into his arm. Crystal 1-1 was ruthless and was about to cut off his arm, but Fleischer grabbed his hand that was holding the knife. Wait! He took out the blood bottle that he had prepared in advance from his pocket, tore off the cap, and poured the venomous blood on Crystal's arm. With a sizzling sound, Crystal 1-1 suppressed a cry of pain. Soon, the tentacles of flesh had disappeared, and mold-like erosion marks appeared on the incomplete flesh, deep enough to see bone. The effect of fighting poison with poison was outstanding, but emergency treatment could only be done to this extent. Fleischer roughly stroked his arm, pulled out the poison, and left the rest to the medics. After spraying a layer of spray, a mechanical splint was immediately installed on his arm, and the injury could no longer be seen. Crystal 1-1 saluted Fleischer, got up, and motioned for his subordinates to clean up the mess, and then prepared to set off again. Without giving them any chance to catch their breath, a new mission was assigned from Yensher. The group of lunatics from the Fine Knight Society finally realized that something was wrong and began to riot and resist, but the general trend was gone. They had long been separated into different places, waiting for the Legion to annihilate them. There were many missions, but Fleischer wasn't on this mission. Soon, Tony's angry voice sounded in the earpiece. A5, I screwed up, foo *K. One of them ran away, damn it. This time I failed miserably. I'll be there immediately. Fleischer replied, picked up his sword from the ground, waved goodbye, and was about to leave when Crystal 1-1 stopped him. He picked up Fleischer's pistol from the ground, then took out his magazine, filled it with several red crystal bullets, and handed it to Fleischer. Blessed bullets can effectively kill hell creatures. He saluted Fleischer and said goodbye. Have a safe trip, sir. Okay. Fleischer stuffed the gun into his saddlebag, waved at them, turned around, grabbed the hanging steel rope, and quickly climbed up. In midair, he pressed the earpiece. This is Fleischer. What's going on? A priest ran away, Tony panted. While running, Tony panted as he reported. I was 1 step too late. That guy has already run out of the cordon and into a public area. Is the sniper in position? F***CK. There was a loud roar from the other end of the earpiece, and the faint roar of eternal night. Then there was the sound of an explosion. Intensive gunshots rang out, and the earpiece was cut off. As the rope rose, Fleischer also heard the gunshots gradually approaching. He gripped the sword of virtue tightly and was ready to rush out the moment the deck flipped up. Then he saw a small square in a mess. Many tourists were already dead on the street, and several walking corpses of the Fine Knight Society were shooting wildly with guns, causing chaos. There were also a few passengers who had already been held hostage. From the exit of the underground passage, a half-broken figure slowly walked out. Chapter 413. That person was wearing a charred, purple robe, and his entire face was dyed red with blood. He held a strange long sword in his hand. He seemed to be seriously injured as he staggered forward. When he saw the Iron Cast army rushing over, he revealed a sinister smile. Get lost. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed down. The power from the rotten dream instantly enveloped the entire square. Dozens of flesh tentacles grew out from the blade and swept across. After forcing the Iron Cast army to retreat, they pulled a few passengers who couldn't escape in time. Those victims were pulled into the illusory blade. Their voices could no longer be heard. Only the sound of chewing could be heard. Then, he casually pulled a hostage from the hands of the believers and placed the wriggling blade on that person's neck. Get out of my way. He stared with his scarlet eyes and sharp canine teeth. Whoever takes another step forward will die. Unfortunately, his strategy was used in the wrong place. The Astronomy Association never negotiated with this group of lunatics, especially the Iron Cast Army. Without orders from above, even if they were holding Commander AI Ching hostage, this group of war machines would never hesitate. The purple-clothed priest's expression twitched. The blade in his hand was about to slash down again. At this time, Huaisher finally stepped forward. "Wait, calm down, calm down." He walked out and shouted, "I'm a negotiator. You can talk to me if you have anything to say." He was a ghost negotiator. He even had to check his phone before he could write the judgment for the negotiation. But he had to talk now. Who asked that unlucky person to be so familiar with him? Thinking of this, Huaisher couldn't help but sigh. He glared at the pale hostage with a runny nose. "Yuan Zhao, why is it you again? Why are you a rank 2 sublimator? Do you have to be so embarrassing?" Yuan Zhao also looked at him with a dumbfounded expression. He glared back, meaning, "I just came out to buy cold medicine. I don't know what happened." He had just walked out of the pharmacy when he was held hostage by more than 10 lunatics with guns and cannons. He didn't know where to start. He didn't know what had happened. The two of them exchanged glances and then realized that neither of them could understand what the other was saying. It was like a chicken trying to talk to a duck. "Negotiator?" The priest in purple frowned and asked suspiciously, "Is there such a position in the Astronomy Association?" "Of course there is. You haven't heard of it because you're ignorant, okay?" Huaisher's voice shook as he said, "I'm super good at negotiating. Just now, I even made an old man cry because he didn't want to pay after his sword was finished." "Oh, right. Is he one of your people?" He stepped forward and heard the purple-robed priest's angry shout, "Stop! Don't move!" He stood there awkwardly. The blade was raised an inch, and the sticky flesh tentacles were already licking Yuan Zhao's neck. Yuan Zhao's expression was terrified. He glared fiercely at Huaisher, hinting him not to act recklessly. How was this bastard a negotiation expert? He was simply an evil spirit that had come to take his life. It was more like he was an expert. What kind of negotiation was this? At this time, the purple-robed priest had already made his decision. Although he didn't believe Huaisher's nonsense of being a negotiation expert, seeing the army stop when he came out, it seemed like he had a lot of status. "You, throw away your weapon." He raised his sword and said coldly. Huaisher raised his hand and threw the sword of virtue behind him. He turned around and asked, "And then, raise your hand and put it where I can see it." He said cautiously, "Walk this way. Slow down a bit. Otherwise, this little bastard is dead. Do you understand?" He tightened his grip on the sword, and Yuan Zhao's neck was about to be cut open. What was even more disgusting was that the flesh tentacles were still crawling on his face and scratching his nose. He trembled and couldn't help but want to sneeze. It was too itchy. Good, is this correct?" Huaisher put on her standard business-like smile, raised her hands high, slowed down her pace, and walked forward step by step. He secretly calculated the distance between them. 15 meters. It was still too far. If there was a slight problem, Yuan Zhao would lose his neck. The Yuan family might even give him a new head. He stepped forward step by step. There were still 5 steps left. He took a deep breath and took another step forward. The floor under his feet slightly whined. Yu's steps was charging, causing the muscles under his trousers to tighten and blue veins to appear. 2 more steps. Then he saw Yuan Zhao take a deep breath. He couldn't help but raise his head and sneeze loudly. Snot bubbles flew out. In the silence, a strange sound suddenly came from his chest. The purple-robed priest's expression suddenly changed. He didn't hesitate to hold his sword tightly. Slash! Huaisher was even faster than him. His raised hand swung down, and the axe of wrath flew out. At the same time, the floor under Huaisher's feet suddenly shattered. His body shot forward without warning. Accelerate! But he was still 1 step too slow. Right in front of him, the purple-robed priest's face was ferocious. His body was rapidly expanding, as if something was rapidly growing in his body. The rotten dream from the abyss was about to take shape and break out of its shell. "Let's die together." He laughed shrilly, but his laughter stopped abruptly. There was a burst of thunder. It was like a predator suddenly leaping out of the shadows, letting out a roar that shocked everyone's soul. Everyone's consciousness froze for a short moment. A sharp beam of light descended from the sky. It was like lightning bursting out of the thunder. A fleeting shadow appeared behind the purple-robed priest without warning. It raised an exaggerated and majestic broadsword and slashed down. Iron light rose from the sword's spine, faintly intertwining into a pure white tiger. It looked down indifferently at everything in the world. Its eyes were blood red. It gnashed its teeth and sucked blood. Its stomach was rumbling with hunger. Stared at by the pair of empty eyes, the purple-robed priest's movements were completely frozen. Even the changes in his body came to an abrupt halt. He was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Stigmata relic, Mountain Lord. In the blink of an eye, the Mountain Lord's broadsword slashed through. The stigmata of tyranny in the blade was activated. It easily pierced through the purple-robed priest's nightmare and body. It cut through and devoured everything. Dazzling scarlet splashed out and fell in the girl's sword-wielding hands. Yuan. Amidst the gunshots of the Iron Cast army, she reached out and pulled Yuan Zhao up from the ground. She lowered her head and looked at him. Didn't you say you came out to buy cold medicine? She frowned and asked, Why did you come here? It's a long story. Yuan Zhao reflexively stuffed an origin substance model deeper into his chest. During the fight, the model's box was broken, revealing the scantily clad girl inside. So you used the excuse of having a cold to not go out. Did you come to this kind of place? Yuan's eyes immediately became disdainful. Think about how to explain it to Aunt. Don't. Yuan Zhao was shocked. He didn't even have time to wipe his snot. He wanted to hug Yuan's leg. Big sister, spare me this time, just this time. He didn't manage to hug her leg. However, he was stopped by a broadsword. Yuan picked up this embarrassing thing and tossed it to the side. The broadsword in her hand quickly shrank until it turned into a bracelet and returned to her wrist. I've troubled you again, Mr. Huaishur. The girl in the gray dress bowed, her expression becoming dignified and solemn. She lowered her head and thanked the dazed Huaishur. It's all thanks to you. Otherwise, this disappointing Yuan Zhao would have been in trouble again. Ah, it's nothing. I just acted courageously for a just cause. Huaishur finally reacted. He hurriedly waved his hand and looked curiously at the pitiful youth not far away. Is he really okay? Yuan Zhao opened his mouth to speak, but Yuan immediately interrupted him. He's fine. The girl glanced at her cousin and said, It's just a small cold. Thank you for your concern. You're running out to buy such shameless things with a fever. I'll report it to aunt and uncle in detail later. Yuan, don't go too far. As if he had seen the end of the world, Yuan Zhao's eyes widened in grief and indignation. If we're going to die, we're going to die together. Be careful, or I'll tell Huaishur. Smack. Yuan's hand was as fast as lightning. Yuan Zhao's eyes rolled back, and he fell to the ground before he could finish his words. Beside him, Huaishur was dumbfounded. Did he just mention me? No. Yuan turned around with a serious expression. He caught a cold and was confused by the fever. But he said he was going to tell me, no. Yuan emphasized again, her expression unprecedentedly serious. He caught a cold and fainted. Under the girl's stern gaze, Huaishur wisely chose to give up on this issue. It was only right for a cousin to beat up a cousin. What did it have to do with Huaishur? Then, the girl picked up her unconscious cousin and politely said goodbye. After a simple examination and verification, they turned and left. Huaishur was left standing alone in the same place, at a loss. Soon, when he was examining the body of the purple-clothed priest, he saw a phone on the ground. The camera was still on, and the screen was not locked. When he picked it up, he accidentally touched the shutter, and a familiar sound was heard. Huaishur froze for a moment and frowned. Do you want to send the photo? The software popped up a notification. Huaishur chose no and exited the photo mode, revealing that the chat group was already filled with photos. Every photo was of a face that she was incomparably familiar with. Huaishur was stunned. What kind of group is this? Why are all the photos in this group of myself? And there were captions next to the photos, His Royal Highness seems to be lost. His Royal Highness smiling. His Royal Highness is back. His Royal Highness eating breakfast. Asterisk. Super cute. I want to rub my face. His Royal Highness shopping. His Royal Highness smoking. The woman next to him is so annoying. In the middle, there were a bunch of group members shouting excitedly. Take more photos. Take more photos. Oh, as expected of the vice president. So awesome. Majimoto. I'm so hungry and thirsty. Type with both hands to show my innocence. I'm almost done. Is there anything else? Huaishi's hand trembled, then trembled again, and the corner of his eyes twitched. When he opened the group information with trembling hands, he saw the title Paradise Prince Fan Club, and suddenly his vision went dark. In a short period of being stunned, footsteps suddenly sounded from a distance. In such a hurry, Yuan panted slightly, as if she had sprinted over. Her dignified and serious face revealed a rare hint of panic. She looked around nervously and asked, Mr. Huaishi, may I ask if you've seen the mobile phone? Before she finished, she saw Huaishi's dumbfounded face. And the thing he picked up, the screen of the phone, was still lit. Countless messages from the group members flashed, one after another. She was stiff in the same place. You are the vice president? In the dead silence, Huaishi stared at the girl in front of him. It suddenly dawned on him. In an instant, all the questions ushered in the only answer. Huaishi suddenly understood, but he couldn't believe it. You saw it. Yuan lowered her head. She had a dignified and solemn expression, but it made people feel extra scared. She stared at Huaishi's face and asked softly, You saw it, right? Huaishi's expression twitched wildly, and he felt the premonition of death suddenly beating wildly, and then quickly disappearing without a trace. In the silence, the girl's eyes gradually became red. Chapter 414. Huaishi was still in a daze. Then he found that he seemed to have accidentally made Yuan cry. That's not right. I treat you as a friend, but you covet my body. Shouldn't I be the one crying at this time? Huaishi coughed awkwardly. That I didn't. Yuan suddenly said. No, I didn't. Yuan raised her voice. Her eyes were red, and she was not dignified. She was like a child who had been annoyed, at a loss. Okay, I know. Huaishi suddenly interrupted her. He got up and took a step forward. He raised his hand to stop her from continuing and apologized solemnly. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Anyway, I'm sorry. He handed the phone to Yuan. I don't know what happened, but I suddenly found a mobile phone. Although it's not yours, I have to go to work later. Can you help me return it to the owner? He said, No matter how I look at it, it seems to be very expensive, right? Yuan hesitated and did not take it. She was a little hesitant. Huaishi asked softly, Just do me a favor, okay? Okay. I said okay. Yuan finally took the phone. She raised her wrist and rubbed her red eyes. She tried to keep a straight face, but she did not dare to look at Huaishi. Her eyes wandered. Well, I have to go. It's not safe for you to be alone. Go back quickly. Huaishi took 2 steps back and said goodbye softly. After taking 2 steps, he seemed to think of something and strode back. Standing in front of Yuan, the girl in the gray skirt was covered by a shadow. She shrunk her shoulders subconsciously. She heard Huaishi's voice. By the way, please help me remind the owner. Don't do this next time. He said calmly. If you want to take a picture, just tell me. After that, Huaishi took a few steps back and waved at her. He turned and left. Only Yuan was left standing in the same place, looking down at her mobile phone. After a long time, she looked up at the direction Huaishi left. He sniffed hard. Only at this moment did she look like a 16-year-old girl. There were heroes in this world. On her 16th birthday, she had suddenly discovered this, though she had never entertained any hope of such a fact. However, everything that she had seen on the television in the ward that day had been deeply imprinted into her memory, along with the impact of a violent storm. She seemed to be different from before. From a very young age, she was the kind of child that all parents hoped for. They wouldn't cry, quarrel, or make a fuss. They wouldn't clamor to see Santa Claus or cartoons, and they would scoff at all the childish things that only existed in storybooks. Like a little adult, her mother always smiled and pinched her face. But there was nothing wrong with being like an adult. At least, it was better than being a troublesome cousin who was always crying and making trouble. That kind of attitude of looking down on the world because of his youth was too childish. Other than family, there wouldn't always be someone to clean up the mess for you. All this time, she had been trying to face all this with a serious and dignified attitude, abandoning those immature weaknesses and beautiful dreams, and trying hard to face this overly large and indifferent world. Until then, it should have been like this. But suddenly, one day, she found that this world was different from what she had imagined. It was like seeing a flame in the distance from a long night. There were heroes in this world, and he held the flame high and walked in front. There was no fear, no fear. Just like in the story, he walked in the darkness with a smile. Although there were some differences, it still made people yearn for it, and it still shone brightly. For the first time in her life, she actually felt a little jealous of her cousin. Why would someone challenge those enemies for such a childish person? Why could he become friends with such a person so easily? Why was the person being protected? Not her. When she came back to her senses, there was a limited edition silver card in her hand. When she began to try to trace everything left by that figure, she seemed to have become the vice president of a strange fan club. For the first time, she felt that it was good to be rich. Even if she spent all her pocket money, her parents wouldn't suspect her. It was really good to have a dignified character. In addition, there were too many firsts because of this. Even if it was just foolishly cheering for strangers on the internet, it could also make people happy. Even if she chased after someone's back with the expectation of not getting a response, it didn't matter if she became the kind of person she used to look down on. This was the little secret that belonged to Yuan, a secret hidden in her heart that would never be spoken out. It should have been like this. She lowered her head and looked at the concerned messages on her phone because she hadn't spoken for a long time. She couldn't help but rub her nose. Hesitating, her fingers pressed on the screen. I've been discovered. QAQ. Is the enemy so difficult to deal with? Tony, who was walking towards him, asked curiously, why do you look so bleak? No, it's just, I was scared. Huaisher scratched his head awkwardly and was silent for a long time. He shrugged and said, I just suddenly realized that maybe I'm more popular than I thought. You know? Wow, you're too much, aren't you? Tony shook his head and said, with a cowherd face, you're saying things that will hurt us single dogs. I don't have a girlfriend either, okay? You just want to play for a while and don't want to confirm your relationship, right? Tony's eyes were full of disdain. I've seen a lot of scumbags like you. Last time, there was one in the Dark Army who was like you and almost went bald. You'd better be careful. I'm only 17. Even if I lose my hair, I'll have to wait until I'm the same age as you. Huaisher rolled his eyes. Besides, how can you call it scumbag when it comes to idols? I'm just worried about how to face my female fans. Yeah, I knew it. Tony shook his head in disdain. Bastard, what do you know? Huaisher was stunned for a long time. How did you know? Tony asked. How do you know I don't know? Okay, ban the dolls. Ban the dolls. That's enough. Huaisher interrupted him. He couldn't even talk about serious things with this guy. He decisively changed the topic. Have you solved the problem on your side? Most of them don't need us to do anything. The Iron Legion took care of them directly. But the next one is a little more difficult. Tony scratched his head and led the way in front. The two of them took the internal express train prepared by Yinshi and were quickly taken to the depths of the train. Generally speaking, the mission is difficult because the support from above is not enough. You have to rely on yourself. Secondly, the mission requirements are too strange. You have to do things with your hands tied. This time, there are no extra requirements. It's as difficult as an outing. He said, although it's smooth sailing, there's still a problem. Until now, the priest of the Finite Society hasn't shown himself. There's information that he quietly boarded the train at the border of the Gray Coast. But we searched the entire train and couldn't find him at all. I'm afraid he decided to use remote control from the beginning. He hid in that corner and didn't want to meet his cannon fodder at all. Originally, in order to deal with him, I specially applied for a numbered spell bomb, but I haven't met him yet. I'm afraid he's hiding and wants to do something. While complaining, his hands didn't stop moving. He directly sent the detailed information and photos to Huaishur through his mobile phone. You also have to be careful. If you meet him, quickly run and call for help. If you can't call for help or run away, then it'll be bad. In the photo was a strange middle-aged man. The first impression he gave was that he was thin, as if he was malnourished. His eyes were protruding, and there were two thick black circles under his eyes that only the mighty people in the tribulation stage had. Furthermore, those two dark green eyes were extremely frightening. There was a strange shadow in them, and one could feel a chill even though they were separated by a photo. Mirando M. Landau, one of the priests of the Fine Knight Society. It is said that he was once blessed by a large group leader and was given the rank of Bestir not long ago. And he himself is an ascendant who voluntarily entered the abyss. It has been confirmed that he is a fourth-order stigmata of the American lineage, the slender ghost shadow. He can teleport in dark places at will. According to the information, he has the ability to clone. More importantly, he has a stigmata relic in his hands. After combining with his own stigmata, he can form the divine mark, Dracula. None of these were things that Huaishur could defeat. Forget about the priest of the Fine Knight Society. He couldn't deal with the fourth-order stigmata, the rank of the bestower, and the divine mark. Even if he worked hard now and could cut down a third order, it would be useless if he encountered a fourth order. Not to mention other things, even if it was a copycat angel, it would be a piece of cake to kill a company like him. And the bestower was the rank of the group leader, which was an out-and-out high level. The bestower, the wearer, the crown wearer, and the ruler above. This was the division of the walking disasters in the eternal abyss. All hell creatures with self-consciousness would be given a unique name from a certain destructive element, regardless of whether they were strong or weak. After being given a name, they would be pulled out from the countless monsters and have self-consciousness and pursuits. Unique, and the wearer knew honor and shame, and was no longer limited by their nature of ignorance and ugliness. After getting rid of the defects and limitations of the past, they advanced into a new form and began to seek a higher source of wisdom and power. And the crown wearer was one level higher. After being recognized by the ruler as his own kin, he knew etiquette, order, and hierarchy and became the emissary of the abyss, and was given the honor and status of commanding the same kind. Finally, the ruler set the rules and controlled the endless abyss under his command. He was the supreme in hell. The four were like the castes in India, forming the chaotic order in the abyss. Huaishur was just a second order. No matter how many cheats he had, he was just a newbie. How could he fight with them? What's more, there was the divine mark in his hand. Huaishur didn't dare to be stubborn and directly gave up. So, it was still right to call someone. If he had to rely on himself, he didn't know how long it would take. In addition, there was now a problem that they needed to solve. Now on the Stellaris, the last remnants of the Fine Knight Society. Chapter 415. Following the Astronomy Association's sudden cleanup operation, the Iron Foundry Legion swept through the entire Stellaris and cleaned up the place. Most of the Rotten Dream believers were killed in the first round of attacks. Including more than 300 high-level believers, 16 priests were all killed. There were some who put up a resistance, but under the attack of the cannons and the ascendants, it didn't take long for them to be wiped out. Now, there were only a few dozen people left. Under the leadership of 7 or 8 priests, they were holed up in a corner and stubbornly resisting. If you encounter something you can't solve, can't you just fire a shot? Huaishur still wanted to admire the support of the cannons. Fire at the engine room? Tony was shocked by Huaishur's death-seeking creativity. Are you really a little genius? Where? Huaishur seemed to have heard a name that he was particularly interested in. His eyes lit up. Engine room? Yes. That's great. Cough, cough. It takes too much effort. Huaishur almost let it slip. He couldn't help but rub his hands in excitement. Wasn't this why he had called for the Astronomy Association support? It was finally about to begin. They passed through the open hatch and through the layers of open doors. They arrived outside the heavily guarded blockade. Inside the layers of the Iron Cast Army's formation, the engine room was completely surrounded. In the innermost layer, the thick and heavy door had been completely distorted. There was a large hole in it, and the edges were dyed scarlet with blood. Several incomplete corpses could be vaguely seen in the corridor inside. The door of the engine room was covered in blood and squirming flesh. It was like the organs of a monster, and several hideous eyes were constantly shaking. They faced each other in silence. It was obvious that the two had been waiting for a long time. The black-bearded Amazon behind the formation waved at them. "Why'd you come down?" Tony was shocked. "Aren't you a bodyguard in the captain's room?" As the saying went, all tactics were changed. Especially when the situation was against the wind, everyone liked to do this once or twice. As long as they succeeded once, they could instantly turn the situation around and maximize the effect of the program. It was simply an art. It could be said that the Iron Foundry Legion on the Stellaris had been mobilized in full force. The weakest one was the command center on the train, where AI Ching was in the conductor's room. As a guard, Amazon was the last line of defense. If he dared to leave his post without permission, even if nothing happened, he would be punished. Moreover, if he offended such a narrow-minded woman like AI Ching, he would probably be tortured to death in the future. "I've been ordered to deliver the goods." Amazon shrugged and raised her hand, revealing the small box in her hand. "She told me to bring this to you. She said that it's time for you to shine." He handed the box to Huai Shi. "What was this?" After opening it, there was only a key ring inside, and there seemed to be a tooth hanging from it. It had sharp edges, like a wolf or something else. It was only the size of a thumb. Huai Shi picked it up and sniffed it. He felt that there were traces of alchemy inside, but he could not tell how it was used. "She said that you should just take it with you. It will come in handy eventually." "Okay." Huai Shi hung it on the saddle and looked sideways at the door of the engine room behind the crack in the gate. The deformed eyeball was still slowly turning. Every time it opened and closed, it would split or merge. The pupil was constantly changing. Looking at it for a long time would make one dizzy and sleepy. The soul lens sent over the latest results. Through the wall, Howren could see layers of tight defenses. The entire interior had been deepened, forming a hell of decaying dreams, which was constantly eroding the Stellaris. Obviously, those guys were planning to take advantage of the terrain and fight to the death with the Astronomy Society. However, considering the equipment in the engine room, the Astronomy Society could not use any heavy firepower. Otherwise, it would be fine if the ship was stranded, but if it sank on the endless sea, it would be over. Even if the person with the agreement could use the abyssal ocean current to travel freely, other things involved in it would all flow into the abyssal hell and belong to the ruler. Leviathan would definitely accept this gift and would not spit it out for the sake of the Astronomy Society. "That's a little tricky." Tony scratched his hoarse face. "Just a bunch of clowns who think they've succeeded. What's so hard about it?" Following the old voice, the ceiling slowly cracked open, and Yinshur, shrouded in steel and countless cables, slowly descended. The young man's face was covered by a huge eyepiece, but his lips were slowly opening and closing, once again letting out his own voice. "Oh, old man, you could talk now. I've temporarily diverted some of my energy," Mr. Fan ordered calmly. "Prepare to attack in 3 minutes. Since you're here, why don't you lend us a hand?" Tony and Huai Shi prepared to warm up. "Me too," Huai Shi asked. Mr. Fan nodded and turned his head slightly. "I heard you've received the true teachings of the king of ghost beasts." "Who?" Huai Shi was confused for a long time before he finally understood. "Ah, you mean the orchard gym? I dare not say I've received the true teachings, but does my singing of Yeoman count? In some ways, this is even rarer than receiving the true teachings." Mr. Fan smiled slightly. The countless lenses on his eyepiece focused on Huai Shi's eyes. He focused on his face and asked seriously, "How fast can you be?" "If I can prepare in advance and get into position," Huai Shi muttered to himself for a moment, then received an answer. "Half as fast as Teacher Luo." "Very good. Then there's no need to use any other methods," Mr. Fan said. "In 2 minutes, I will provide you with origin substances to suppress them. Go in and kill everyone inside. Aiden will cooperate with you and Tony." It was as if they were discussing going out to buy groceries. Just like that, it was decided so easily. Hearing this, Tony could not help but sigh and spread out his arms. Naturally, his subordinates came forward to help him take off the armor on his body. Even the gun and magazine were removed, leaving only two strange military knives with hollowed out in the middle of their bodies. Huaisher didn't say anything else. He just quietly stared at the entrance to the engine room through the large shield of the Iron Legion. Through the layers of thick iron doors and deep barriers, he could feel the resonance from the Book of Destiny become clearer. There, something was waiting for him. It had been impatient for a long time. One more minute, Mr. Fan suddenly reminded. The countless eyepieces on his face contracted and expanded, constantly observing everything in the engine room. With a light flick of his finger, a few spots of light landed on the corneas of Huaisher and the others. Then, Huaisher's vision seemed to penetrate the wall and peeked into the huge engine room. The engine room, which was as large as a factory, seemed to have become the body of a monster. Everywhere was a thermal image formed by pieces of flesh. Between the 6 sets of engines, a few specially marked figures could be seen anxiously walking around, as if they were arguing with each other. There were even more people holding weapons and standing guard at the door, ready for battle. All the other believers were prostrating on the ground, as if they were worshipping something fervently, raising their heads and chanting. A total of 41 people. 15 seconds, Mr. Fan reminded. Huaisher took a deep breath and began to miss her own molten iron breath. After getting used to being a dog, he began to feel uncomfortable being a human. There were no sharp teeth, no hard scales, no heavy body, and no slender tail. Fortunately, there were techniques to make up for all of these. Huaisher pulled out the sword of virtue, thought for a moment, and dispelled the axe of wrath, switching to the sacrificial knife. The impact of the origin substance on this thing, who knew if it was still human or not, was still more effective. The sacrificial knife's ability to absorb blood was better and more convenient. Moreover, if necessary, he could freely adjust the sacrificial knife's weight, speed, and impact. The sword of virtue had begun to faintly hum. It felt the presence of evil. 5, for the final countdown was about to begin. Huaisher bent slightly, the muscles of his calves twitching and contracting slowly, like a spring that was being compressed. His step was ready, but his skin began to faintly redden because hot blood flowed through his veins and surged violently. It was like a hydraulic valve, endlessly injecting more power into his muscles. Amazin seemed to have sensed something and turned to look at him in astonishment, unable to hide his admiration and shock. With the help of the mirror of nihility, he entered a state that he hadn't entered in a long time. The flames of the mountain ghost's eyes burned. Fridu? At that moment, Mr. Fan's eyes drooped, and he softly murmured, 1. The sound of hummingbirds chirping rang out. Deathly silence abruptly descended, because all sound was instantly restrained. The formless sound formed a tangible sharp object in the air. Just outside the engine room, all the cabin plates suddenly shook and flipped open, revealing the huge machinery that was ready to go behind them. A terrifying sonic boom suddenly swept out, accompanied by the impact of dozens of iron pillars, and poured into the sealed engine room. What followed was a crisscross of intense light. The terrifyingly high heat converged into beams of dazzling lasers. After passing through the layers of lenses, the lasers pierced through a great distance, easily burning through the steel, penetrating the internal space, and casually coming out from the other side. After piercing through the insignificant things, the lasers slowly dissipated. 16 blazing lasers violently stirred, slashing horizontally and vertically, but the scale was so precise that it was impossible to see with the naked eye. Even if it was slashed thousands of times in an instant, it didn't damage any of the key engines or machinery. It was like a sharp dissector. He deftly removed the hard outer shell that was covered with thorns, and the soft and smelly flesh of the fruit was revealed. As for Huaisher, she had already disappeared from where she stood. Chapter 416. The distance of 100 meters disappeared in an instant. Huaishir had already brushed past the high temperature of the laser, stepped over the broken flesh, and charged into the engine room. He was the first to see a frightened and bloated face. It was as if his entire body had become a broken bag stuffed with wriggling flesh. The bloated man didn't even have time to react before the youth disappeared in front of his eyes. He appeared behind him. Immediately afterwards, 3 crisscrossing slashes appeared on his chest, just like the sorrowful notes that suddenly jumped out from a cello. Grand Triad, 3 attacks in an instant, sweeping, piercing, and slashing. Piercing the heart, chopping off the hand, and decapitating the head. The moment they passed each other, Huaishir sprinted forward without looking back. She rushed straight at the priest in blue who was frozen in place in front of her. It wasn't just the infrasound, but also the interference of some kind of weapon. Under the suppression of Yinshir's origin substance, all the enemies were paralyzed, unable to react to the outside attack. Timing was precious. Under the acceleration of Yu's steps, the mountain ghost suddenly appeared like a shadow. He raised the sacrificial blade from his back and pierced through the blue-clothed priest's chest. Immediately afterwards, the virtuous sword swept across. Decapitation. After learning his lesson last time, Huaishir poured all the positive energy he had been brewing for a long time into the blade. The blade was already dyed with a faint layer of light, making the broken sword look even more solemn and sacred. As the blade slashed through, a pure white flame lit up from the wound, preventing it from regenerating. Immediately afterwards, the sacrificial blade was pulled out and chopped down at the priest's head. It was directly turned into a handful of ashes. An endless stream of vitality flowed from the hilt and was assimilated by the mountain ghost, providing for the consumption that exceeded the limit. After the successful attack, Huaishir didn't stay any longer. He turned in place and flew towards another target. In front of the blade, the ugly and old female priest trembled slightly. His eyes slowly lifted from their stiff state. She stared at Huaishir with hatred. Withered eye, a dark green ray shot out from her eyes, piercing towards Huaishir's face. As long as one was hit by this sight that was close to the speed of light, no matter what kind of creature it was, they would only end up dying rapidly. There was no way to react or dodge at all. Unfortunately, although Huaishir was faster than light, he was faster than her reaction time. The sacrificial blade was already raised horizontally in front of the withering eye. In the blink of an eye, the blade rapidly decayed, as if it had experienced thousands of years. Cracks appeared on the gemstone on the hilt, which had absorbed countless amounts of blood and chi before it dissipated into a cloud of dust. But that was the end of it, because the sword of virtue had already left her hand, whistling through the air, wedged deeply into her head, and came out from the back of her head. Then, the old woman was burned to ashes by the pure white flames. Of course, before that, the most important thing was decapitation. The fire of alchemy was simply too useful for these creatures that were about to turn into hellish creatures after being assimilated into the abyss. For alchemists, the creatures or items from the abyss were the most commonly dealt with. Deconstructing the calamities and miracles from hell was simply the natural duty of the alchemy fire. As long as it was destroyed by the sword of virtue, a little flame would spread wildly and completely burn the useless remains. No pollution or dust would be left behind. Unfortunately, after killing the 2 priests, the suppressive effect of the origin form had begun to dissipate. Just beside Huaishir, a roar suddenly sounded, "Enjoy the night." A believer who was kneeling on the ground suddenly swelled up, and countless flesh and blood pierced through his nose and skin. He was about to completely turn into a corrosive species. Then, he was frozen in place by the sudden chill. A piece of blood-colored ice was formed. Tony's horse-like face flashed past from the side, and a hollowed-out military knife in his hand struck down. In the resonance like a tuning fork, the ice shattered into ice powder on the ground. Celestial genealogy, Dusk Road, Grade 3 Frost Giant. At this moment, the severe cold of winter wrapped around his hands, and as the 2 military knives were swung, A line of bleak white extended from the floor, the wall, and the ceiling. Within a range of 2 meters, as the blade slashed through the air, a tragic frost mark quickly appeared on those flesh and blood bodies. Then, as the frost melted, they were cleanly broken into 2 pieces. In the engine room, a cold wind suddenly blew. As Ahmadin blew the horn in his hand, a strong aura of death continuously emerged, and then a phantom warship broke through the waves, setting off a wave of death aura. Even the huge engine room became narrow and cramped compared to the size of the phantom warship. Just as the warship rumbled forward, dozens of hook ropes were thrown out from it, pulling the believers all over the ground and pulling them into the gloomy ghost ship, and they were no longer seen. More dark undead crawled out from the darkness, and the zombies and skeletons gathered into a formation, brandishing swords and knives in their hands. They suddenly poked their heads out from the waves of death aura, stretched out their hands, and pulled their opponents down one by one. They definitely did not pick those priests who resisted, but specifically targeted those fanatics who knelt on the ground and prayed, quickly pulling away the cornerstones of this rotten hell one by one. He alone quickly killed 2/3 of the living creatures in the engine room. More than half of the other survivors were killed by Huaishur and Tony. Only a few priests reacted, but it was too late. For the eternal night, a stooped and skinny giant screamed and spread out his arms. The flesh and blood all over his body and white clothes suddenly exploded, turning into a rain of blood that splashed in all directions. Endless blood spurted out from the huge skeleton, forming a storm that quickly shrouded the attacker. But then a heavy sacrificial knife broke through the air, hungrily extracting the blood aura along the way. It was even more evil than this group of cultists. In an instant, the rust on the knife faded away, and it became gorgeous and majestic again. It nailed into the giant's head with irresistible force. Unfortunately, it could not break through the sturdy bones and cause any more damage. Before the giant priest could smile, he saw the mountain spirit in the darkness rise up and smile at him, and a huge hammer appeared in his hand. Raise, swing, smash. In the whistling sound of the flames, the sacrificial knife penetrated deeply into his head like a nail. The bloody storm stopped abruptly, turning into sticky rain that fell powerlessly, and then it froze into a thick layer of ice. The shriveled corpse fell to the ground, but the head that was pierced through still burned with a bit of vitality, and it was looking at Huaishur with hatred. Pitiful, faithless, you will fall into eternal nightmares. Before he finished, Huaishur raised his foot expressionlessly. You step. With a bang, the ground shook, and there were no more squeaking noises. As a few scattered laser beams swept through, the last few resistors were cleanly wiped out. Then, a hurricane swept through, and a large amount of water gushed out from the pipes. Under the action of countless machines, the blood and corpses were quickly washed away. In the end, the entire engine room became spotless again, and it was dignified. It was like magic. Wow, this thing is quite powerful. It must have cost a lot. A certain country bumpkin looked around, touching here and there, as if he had never seen anything before, and clicked his tongue in wonder. Tony, who was next to him, could not stand it anymore. You're the Prince of Paradise. Don't be such a country bumpkin, okay? I haven't seen anything before. Huaishur squatted next to the engine and touched it, almost scalding a layer of skin off his hand. He grimaced and said, "This is the first time I've seen such a big alchemy engine. I really want to take it apart to see what's inside. I remember that you're an alchemist too." Mr. Fan, who was not far away, was quite understanding. If you're interested in metallurgy and rhenology, I can explain it to you later, but these are all products of large workshops, and many of them are monopolized by patents, so you won't be able to learn much. I'll just take a look. Huaishur gave a simple and honest smile. She casually placed her hand on the cabinet and looked at the surrounding facilities before nodding in satisfaction. "I'm done," he said. In his saddlebag, there was a heavy book of steel that had silently appeared. Lord of the Flies, obtained. In the seemingly eternal darkness, waves were surging on the surface of the sea. The only stars that lit up above were the dim projections from the distant border. Those spots of light flickered with the ebb and flow of the waves, drifting erratically. Two men who were smoking squatted on a small boat, nervously staring into the distance with binoculars, accompanied by the roar of a train whistle. In a very distant place, someone raised his wrist and shot a flare into the sky. Then, in the rising hot light, the sharp outline of a train was outlined from the depths of the darkness, revealing a towering and huge body. It looked like a steel fortress floating on the sea. That's the Stellaris? The younger man put out his cigarette and could not help but sigh softly. It's so big. Yes. The older man still held the binoculars and stared at the huge Stellaris illuminated by the flare, and in the reflection of the sea, there was a sticky shadow following closely behind. It seemed that because it was moving too fast, its shadow was left behind on the road. The huge dark silhouette squirmed all the time, closely following behind the Stellaris. Shadow tentacles stretched out from it one after another, tightly entangling the reflection of the Stellaris. Unfortunately, the shadow tentacles that connected the two were too slender, and the connection between them was too weak. The huge shadow could not climb to the edge of the Stellaris. Instead, it seemed to be dragged by a speeding train, twitching in the reflection of the sea with difficulty. Wherever it passed, a layer of wriggling white foam appeared on the surface of the sea like viscera. The stench was pungent. Witness confirmed. The middle-aged man put down the binoculars and took a deep breath, as if he could suppress the fear in his heart. Tell the higher-ups the big fish is here, he said. Sea fishing may begin. Into the second watch, requesting monthly votes. Aloud. Chapter 417. In a quiet coffee shop, a faint roar came from afar. The customers in their seats looked up anxiously, but they couldn't see anything. The street was quiet. The patrolling guards politely told the people who asked for help that it was just a small matter and would be resolved soon. They asked everyone to stay where they were and not to panic or run. Soon, a waiter with a plate politely handed out verification bracelets and the nearest fallout shelter map to every customer. The unhurried and well-prepared appearance successfully calmed some people. Sir, your bracelets and map. When the waiter came to the corner, he saw the person sitting on the chair. The skinny man had his back to the door and looked down at the chessboard in front of him. Unfortunately, no one came to play with him. Cracks gradually appeared on the broken chess pieces on the chessboard. Just as the waiter approached, the last two chess pieces fell apart. Strangely, there seemed to be only one side of the glass pieces on the chessboard, and all of them were chariots and bishops. Only the lonely king was still in the hands of the player. When the player was focused, there seemed to be some strange magic that made the surroundings quiet and undisturbed. The waiter stood hesitantly on the side and didn't know if he should speak. He raised his head. The two blue eyes in the deep eye sockets moved nimbly, and the waiter couldn't help but take a step back. Being stared at by the skinny man was like being stared at by something bad. It made people's hair stand on end, but his voice was low and magnetic, making people feel close and trustworthy. What's the matter? He asked. The waiter hesitated and handed over the things on the plate. This is your verification bracelet and the nearest fallout shelter map. If anything happens, you can go there immediately. I will. He smiled at the waiter and emphasized again, I will. His smile was kind, making people feel at ease. The waiter couldn't help but smile and leave in a happy mood. He was left alone in front of the silent chessboard, deep in thought, until in his hand, the piece that represented the king also showed a tragic mark. In a trance, there seemed to be a wail from afar. The wail of the ruler? He whispered. It seems to be no different from the voice of the ruled. Don't you feel pity? Mr. Mirando. Across from him, on the empty seat, came a low and elegant voice with a reserved Roman accent. The phantom-like middle-aged man held an exquisite cane in his hand and was dressed in formal attire. His slightly white sideburns were neatly arranged, and his long hair was combed to the back of his head. He asked curiously, or rather, the superior you believe and has met a tragic end. Don't you feel a little guilty for standing by and doing nothing? Guilty? Why? Mirando asked. Because of my former beliefs. Exactly. The elegant man nodded. I think you're mistaken about one thing, Mr. Mathers. Mirando shook his head slightly and smiled mockingly. From the very beginning, things like faith have always been a sneaky exchange for humans. It can't be said to be equal, nor can it be called fair. With just verbal praise, you want to be safe. With just a little money, you want to live a long life. With just a little bit of devotion, you want to go to heaven. Isn't this a joke? It doesn't matter if the object of faith comes from heaven or the abyss. It doesn't matter if the other party promises paradise or hell. It doesn't even matter if those promises have the possibility of being realized, whether it is the truth or a lie. He said firmly, the so-called faith is the shameless greed of the weak. It is a kind of begging and a kind of luck in the face of fear. Speaking of his own opinions so frankly, he asked seriously, since I already don't know shame, why should I feel ashamed? Mathers raised his eyebrows slightly. Then, do you hate faith? No, it's the opposite. I thirst for faith more than anyone else, because I know my own weakness and incompetence, and I also know my own limitations. Mirando told him seriously, I want faith. I want to have a faith full of power. So, I will believe in whoever gives me power. It's that simple. Mathers seemed to be stunned. He looked at his collaborator in front of him with slight astonishment. After a long time, he sighed in admiration. Let's not talk about whether your words are reasonable or not. After so many years, it is really rare to meet someone as magnanimous as you. Is this not good? Mirando asked. Or is it that this kind of naked shamelessness is too disgusting? No, I think this is more pleasant. Mathers leaned closer with his cane and laughed softly. A long time ago, the priests who preached would say that a long time ago, humans lived in a beautiful heaven and followed the orders of God. They lived a carefree life, but they were not allowed to eat the fruit on the tree. Do you know why? I would like to hear the details. Because only the sinful who ate the apple know shame, Mathers said. Mathers said, shame is something prepared for those who have sinned. Those who have true faith will only look down on it and scoff at it. Mirando laughed. Do you think I'm innocent, Mr. Mathers? No. It would be better to say that you and I are the kind of people who have committed the most heinous crimes, right? Mathers shook his head. How can there be a pure and righteous person like you and me who would fall into the abyss with hands full of blood? Then what is the meaning of this story? If you want to find meaning, then it can only explain one thing. Mathers laughed mockingly. From the beginning, the so-called faith is a lie. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a low and loud sound came from afar. In Mirando's hand, a crack appeared on the Crystal King's chess piece again. Faint ink appeared from within and flowed out from the king's face. It was like blood. The king is about to die. Mathers raised his hand and opened his palm. A blood-red chess piece slowly appeared between his 5 fingers. It was a chess piece with a holy crown on its head, a pure white robe on its body, and a rose rosary in its hand. Its face was impressively that of Mirando's. I think it's time for you to appear. He slowly got up and placed the chess piece in Mirando's hand. He bent down and whispered softly in his ear, the last bishop. I will. Mirando calmly closed his 5 fingers and asked again, what about you? The middle-aged gentleman who was about to leave stopped and looked back in confusion. You don't plan to appear on the chessboard? Mathers laughed. He took off the round top hat on the hanger and put it on his white hair. For a chess player, there is no need to put any representative on the chessboard, right? Mirando did not speak again. Mathers nodded and turned to leave. When he passed by the seat by the window, his footsteps paused slightly. He seemed to unintentionally look down. On the seat was a haggard man with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an inconspicuous gray suit and was frowning as he drank black coffee without sugar. He looked up at Mathers, and Mathers looked back at him. The two calmly retracted their gazes and continued to go their separate ways. Just like back then. 20 minutes ago, on the surface of the sea outside the Stellaris, the wind was calm and the waves were eerily silent. Far away on the border of London, in the heavily guarded headquarters of the Astronomical Society. After going through double identity and password verification on the 16th floor underground, they transferred to a specialized elevator. After going through another origin substance comparison, the old elevator began to carry the passengers down again. It went straight down and then down again. Overhead floor, L8. The iron bars of the elevator slowly opened. A middle-aged man in a gray maintenance uniform walked out and heard the music from the old television. There was a cold pizza on the reception table at the door, but there was no one on the chair. Until the low sound of the toilet flushing came from the cubicle. An old security guard with a big belly walked out. He shook his legs and returned to his seat. Application report? He flipped through the document the middle-aged man handed over and compared the signature on it. He took out a registration book and signed it. Finally, he picked up a pen and ticked it. He pulled open a drawer and took out a bunch of keys. He stood up and said, "Follow me." The door leading to the warehouse was opened. There was no smell of dust in the air. The good ventilation system maintained a constant temperature. There wasn't even any smell of mold. It was just pure. There was no smell at all. No sound could be heard. There was only the crisp sound of leather boots stepping on the floor, gradually going deeper. In the end, they stopped in front of a huge square cabinet. The guard compared the number on the dust-proof cloth and nodded. Serial item TS 7767. This is it. He turned around and asked, "Do you need to use it here? Or take it away?" The middle-aged worker in a gray maintenance uniform replied, "No, take it away." "Who's going to use it?" The guard asked. "Do you need my help?" "Yes." "Then wait for a moment." The fat guard stretched out his hand and tore off the dust-proof cloth, revealing a well-kept giant globe underneath. It was about the height of an ordinary person and was fixed between 4 layers of brass tracks. However, in addition to the latitude, longitude, and the common meridian lines, there was a new scale, which made it hard to understand. Next to the globe was a small stove and crucible, as well as a sealed jar of animal fat. Soon, the fire burned from the stove, and the fat in the crucible melted from the heat, turning into a clear liquid. After another 3 minutes, the fat boiled and glowed with a flame-like color. The fat guard picked up the pliers and set up the crucible full of boiling fat. He walked to the ladder next to the globe and climbed up the ladder with some difficulty. Coordinates? East of the Asian region, south of the Cyborus Sea. The middle-aged worker looked down at the data on the signature board and reported, longitude 124, 35,946. Latitude 2, 765, 3475. Depth 1, 95, time in 3 seconds. So, after 3 seconds, the boiling fat was poured on the coordinates of the globe. Like an illusion, it disappeared without a trace. It was done. The fat guard climbed down with difficulty and shook hands with the middle-aged worker. After signing 2 words, he packed up everything, returned the ladder to its original position, and covered it with a dust-proof cloth. Finally, he left the warehouse and closed the door. After watching the visitor leave, the fat guard returned to his chair and continued to eat the cold pizza. Melodious music came from the TV. A new program was about to start. At the same time, on the endless sea, the sky was broken. Chapter 4:18. For a moment, the sound of glass shattering suddenly came from the pitch-black sea and sky. It was as if a naughty child had thrown a stone in the middle of the night. It was as if the eternal darkness above the sky had been torn apart. There should not be a sky here, because above their heads was an endless abyss and a bottomless hell. But now, there was a blazing light shining from the deepest darkness and falling. In an instant, it pierced through the sea and the sky. It tore everything apart. The belated whistling suddenly burst out, and endless flames appeared from an unknown depth, roaring towards the present hell, the border, and the present. Beams of flame light pierced down one after another, deeply wedged into the surface of the sea, almost touching the bottom of the phenomenon. In the end, the entire surface of the sea was covered by light. The light was like a forest. A mournful wail exploded out of nowhere. It pierced everyone's eardrums and tore everyone's consciousness, as if it wanted to imprint the pain into every soul. In the reflection on the surface of the sea, the squirming darkness had been nailed to death by countless light spears. Viscous blood spurted out from the surface of the sea in an unscientific manner, turning into a reverse waterfall. The stench of blood spread, bringing with it countless nightmares and rotting mold. The darkness was twitching. It struggled with difficulty. It wanted to escape, but it could no longer move. At the last moment, it used all its power to reach out its tentacles, wanting to touch the edge of the Stellaris. It was only a hair's breadth away. There, all connections with it were cut off. It was destined to be unable to board this escape train, and it would usher in its tragic end in the sea. Dozens of kilometers away, on the inspection ship, the bearded sailor holding the railing raised his binoculars and stared at the tragic scene in the distance. "This is the Egret, requesting an airstrike." He raised the walkie-talkie and said, "Please stand by and be prepared to observe." Soon, a report with the sound of electric currents sounded from the walkie-talkie. "This is Lone Wolf. Liftoff complete. Stand by." "The enemy is due south of the Stellaris," the sailor said in a low voice. "The weather is cloudy, and the waves of the endless sea are level 3. We can attack." "Roger that." A short whisper came from the walkie-talkie. 3 seconds later, something huge swept past the dark sky and was illuminated by the flames for a moment. It rose from the faraway hell, threw something down, and returned it. In the silence, there was another explosion that tore through everything. Along with the terrifying wave, it swept in all directions, and the shrill screams became louder and louder. The Rotten Dream Queen struggled with great difficulty. "Witness complete. Attack effective. Lone Wolf, one more time." "Got it." The giant dark creature once again swept past the depths of hell, scattering destructive buds, causing the frenzied flames to soar into the sky once again. In the reflection on the surface of the sea, the darkness had already been ignited, illuminating the desolate hell. The wailing of a human reverberated in the air and spread out again. But no matter how much he resisted, screamed, and roared, he could not change the fate that was about to happen. The merciless attack, no, the ravaging continued. There was no pause. Firepower enough to burn down the entire infernal realm was thrown onto the endless sea, and the entire night was lit up as bright as day. A sharp blade as large as a mountain fell from the depths of hell, plowing a deep trench on the surface of the sea. The sharp blade disappeared into the depths of hell, but the gap on the surface of the sea could not be closed. The Queen of Rotten Dreams had already been sliced in two from the middle. The mournful voice gradually weakened. The observer smiled and raised the walkie-talkie. "Support team, reporting the situation." There was a long silence, and no one responded. "Support team, reporting the situation." There was still dead silence. In the dead silence, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly sounded on the inspection ship. He turned around in shock, only to see a viscous scarlet slowly seeping out from the cabin. 3 minutes ago, in the 4th decision room of the Asian Territory Command, there was a low hubbub. Every moment, hundreds of reports and applications from all over the world poured in. A large number of new documents were waiting to be approved, and a steady stream of work accumulated. Everyone's faces were filled with sleepiness and haste. They ran back and forth, bringing in and out of reports and documents. But the ear-piercing alarm suddenly pierced through the hubbub. Everyone raised their heads in shock and looked at each other. The dead silence came suddenly. Then, there was the sound of a door being pushed open. Outside, a clerk with dull eyes struggled to support himself against the wall and walked in. He grinned at all his colleagues. It was so hideous and ugly. "Step back." Sensing that something was wrong, the guard pulled out his pistol and pointed it at his face. "Stand there. Don't come forward." So he stopped. He just smiled. His lips gradually opened and closed, and viscous blood flowed out continuously. Amidst the loud noise, the guard pulled the trigger twice, shattering his skull and heart. However, he did not fall down. He still stood stiffly in the same place, twisting his body. His lips opened and closed with difficulty. He said, "Strong, strong, my blood." Then his incomplete body rapidly swelled. Magnificent blood spurted out of his body like a waterfall, but at this moment, the blood turned into a torrent of flames that engulfed everything. The tyrannical flames engulfed everything, turning everything within reach into ashes. The fourth decision room of the Asian Territory Command was silent. In the sharp, busy tone, AI Ching hung up the direct line of the Asian Territory Command expressionlessly. There was no need for any explanation. The moment the communication was cut off, she knew what had happened. Even if the crisis was still unknown, she still accepted this surprise from hell at the first moment. In the silent commander's room, she pondered for a moment, reached out, and took out a metal box with cigarettes, a phone, a pistol, and finally, a matchbox from her pocket. The small matchbox opened, and there were only 3 slender matches inside. Even if she didn't have the urge to smoke, she still took out the 3 warning signs issued to her and placed them on the table. The first question was the current situation of the command center. She lit the match. In the rising flames, the phantoms of explosions and mutilated corpses appeared. The flames flashed for a moment, then extinguished without wind. Her heart sank. The second question was what would happen on the Stellaris next. She lit the second match. The flames rose again, and she saw the mountain-like train shrouded in shadows. Then it collapsed in the turbulence, turning into countless fragments that scattered in the sea. It disappeared. The flames burned out, burning her fingertips. She let out a long breath, maintained her composure, threw the burned-out match into the trash can, and picked up the last one. The third question was, where did the enemy come from? But this time, the match couldn't be ignited. Even when she scratched the phosphor paper, not a single spark dared to jump out. But this was also a kind of hint. The things that couldn't be exposed by the warning signs were categorized into different categories and recorded in the usage manual. As long as she analyzed it carefully, in the silence, there was a sudden and unsettling knock on the door. It was a rhythmic knock 3 times. Then, a wisp of mist slowly flowed in through the crack of the door, turning into the appearance of a skinny man. Under his gray hair, his green eyes were frighteningly bright. It was as if, leading to a nightmare, "Nice to meet you, madam." The man named Miranda gracefully put his hand on his chest and greeted her. "May I know your name?" After a short silence, AI Ching threw away the match in her hand and asked coldly, "Where's Yatin?" "The guard at the door?" Miranda thought for a moment and smiled. "He's asleep, and the night is calling him. I guess it's my turn next, right?" AI Ching raised her eyebrows slightly. She reached out and picked up the pistol on the table. She flipped the safety off, pulled the bolt, and raised the muzzle to aim at the enemy in front of her. "Do you think I'll give up without putting up a fight?" Miranda was amused by her resistance. "You're an ascendant, but you don't have the stigmata. Even if you have a gun in your hand, what can you do? Let me guess. Is there a numbered spell bullet in the gun? Ah, maybe it's prepared for me. But do you think you can hit it? Maybe you have another trump card, but..." A hoarse voice came from behind AI Ching. "Which one are you going to shoot at?" Following Miranda's words, skinny men appeared from behind the wall one after another. With calm smiles, they reached out and pressed down on her shoulders. The skin under the clothes where they pressed down quickly faded and withered, and the blood dissipated. AI Ching's face gradually turned pale. "Don't move." Miranda chuckled. "Otherwise, I can't control myself. What a coincidence." Another voice came from the room. "Me too." The smell of sulfur suddenly spread with the hot wind. Behind AI Ching, a pair of amber eyes slowly opened, and a blurry figure slowly appeared. Following that, there was a solemn and huge, ferocious silhouette behind her. It was a dragon, a red dragon. With a whisper, the sharp, scaly claws swept across. In an instant, it tore Miranda apart and forced him to retreat. It shrouded AI Ching under its wings. Dragon. In an instant, Miranda was stunned. He quickly retreated and finally caught a glimpse of the long, fiery red hair. "Andrea, you're not a grade 3? Miranda was stunned and immediately became vigilant. Grade 3? I was probably 1 month ago. Andrea glanced at him with a faint smile. However, apart from academic achievements, this kind of personal growth in strength, you don't have to talk about it everywhere, do you? Now, the red dragon. Andrea grinned. The ferocious projection of the fire dragon lowered its eyes. Its tyrannical gaze fell on Mirando's face. If you dare to walk into a trap, you must be prepared, right? If so, accompany me to play. In an instant, a blazing torrent whizzed out, easily tearing the inner layer of the carriage apart. It whizzed out from the top floor of the astral and swept across. The flame blade instantly drew an arc in the night sky. It transmitted an alarm to the distance from the darkness. Then, Andrea stepped forward. The suit on her back shattered, and two ferocious wings slowly spread out. In her hands, the air was turbulent. Under the guidance of the law of thermodynamics, the air exploded, condensed, and explored in an instant. In the end, it formed a sticky and dazzling plasma. With a wave of her hand, it whizzed forward. It was as if the sun had swallowed Mirando in an instant. But amidst the intense pain, as his body burned to nothing, endless darkness turned into bats and flew out from his shattered body. They flew all over the sky, and countless scarlet eyes opened. The swarm of bats gathered again, and a blood-red crown was already placed on Mirando's head. Divine Mark Dracula. In that instant, Mirando was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he grinned hideously and chanted an incantation that led to disaster. Once upon a time, there was a dream, a story full of inauspiciousness spilled out from his mouth. In an instant, on the astral, the eyes of thousands of people slowly lit up from their drowsy state. They chanted along with him, narrating a dark fairy tale from the abyss, a story about nightmares. Chapter 419. Amid the ear-piercing sirens, every shelter was filled with panic and screams. Amidst the noise, there were constant stampedes and crowding. But all the noise and noise stopped for a moment at this moment. As Mirando raised his hand, a bronze bell appeared in his hand, and he shook it gently. The crisp sound of the bell spread in the night, bringing with it the lingering sound of nightmares. At that moment, countless red eyes opened in the darkness, glowing with overlapping whispers, telling a story from the abyss. Nightmare, the old man whispered hoarsely. A nightmare is hatching, the girl cried in horror. A woman, an ominous woman, walks in the darkness. The baby in the cradle opened his confused eyes and stared at the illusory world that was gradually turning into a bloody mess. He spoke in the sharp language of the abyss. A loving mother opens her arms and embraces all this despair. It's a good night, someone whispered. Yes, it's a good night. Behind Yuan, the sluggish Yuan, Zhao opened his empty eyes. The good night at the end of the nightmare is waiting for us. On his finger, the skin that had once touched a bracelet, a dark aura of curse emerged continuously, calling for the arrival of the nightmare. It was followed by laughter, hoarse laughter, crisp laughter, coughing laughter, and laughter of madness and fear. Paradise! Thousands of people shouted in unison. Paradise is coming. At this moment, in the sea, time almost froze. In the trench that was slashed out, the stiff and broken shadow shook violently, letting out a sharp cry mixed with joy and sorrow. Squirming, squirming, squirming. In the broken scars, a dark fountain broke out of the sea, responding to the call of the believers and roaring towards the silent Stellaris. It was like a squirming dark hand firmly clinging to the edge of the Stellaris. It crossed the line of despair. Abandoning most of his body and power like a pair of worn-out shoes, the ruler of hell descended upon the Stellaris. And right at the edge of the Stellaris, next to the squirming dark hand, a middle-aged gentleman with a cane raised a finger and slightly raised his hat, greeting the uninvited guest on the train. The squirming darkness did not notice him at all. It did not even pause for a moment as it flowed madly into the depths of the train. Mather smiled and didn't mind. He only glanced at it and then looked away. He raised his cane and used a sharp beak at the end of the cane to cut his index finger. Facing the stinky sea breeze, he raised his finger and pushed it forward, allowing the drop of sparkling blood to fall from his fingertip into the sea. It disappeared. As if he were admiring some beautiful sight, he opened his arms wide and exclaimed aloud, boasting to the world of his unparalleled achievement. Esraig Hail Mo Dream. My blood is strong. Thus, the endless sea began to boil. It was as if it could not contain the overly precious blood. As the disguises and seals were removed one after another, this power from the Golden Dawn operated in the ocean without any concealment, rapidly sprouting and multiplying. It was as if he had to harvest the fruit after planting the seed. The drop of blood that recorded the information of the endless abyssal bloodline began to rapidly take root, expand, and erode, causing the entire shattered ocean to boil. Amidst the earth-shattering roar, countless dazzling rays of light emerged from the abyss. It was a sharp crystal that broke out of the sea. Countless crystal pillars with sharp edges and corners tore through the cover of the ocean, soaring into the sky and spiraling upwards. In the end, they formed majestic giant pearls that were dozens of kilometers long. Formed with a perfect double spiral, the spiraling crystal pillars glowed with blazing light. Thousands of pillars crisscrossed, forming a defense, a fortress, or rather, a cage that isolated the inside from the outside. At this moment, whether it was the astral or the queen of rotten dreams, they were all engulfed in the spiral cage formed by the abyssal blood. 3 minutes. 3 minutes had passed since the first explosion. Calculating the time, it should be time, right? Mathers looked up slightly and stared at the dark sea outside the crystal prison, waiting quietly. At the same time, outside the fourth decision room of the Asia territory, the flames were blazing, but there was no dancing. The huge building was falling apart, but there was no collapse or rumble. This was because the moment the explosion occurred, everything had been forcibly frozen in place in terms of physics. It was as if a supreme law had descended, and all molecules were forcibly sealed, unable to move. Time froze at the moment of the explosion. A translucent projection appeared in the void, looking up at the scene of the explosion. He nodded and turned to the rescue team that had rushed over. Follow the established procedures and carry out the gradual unlocking and rescue. Hurry up and save the casualties and personnel. I'll leave this place to you. The scholars in charge of the border framework nodded and saluted. Thus, the projection silently dissipated. When it appeared again, it was above the Dead Sea. Across the crystal prison, it stared at Mather's face. How should I address you? In the projection, a man with a walking stick stared at Mather's face. Which master of the Golden Dawn came here? Edward Witt? Woodman? Or should I say, Creator Mathers? Samuel McGregor Mathers. The elegant middle-aged gentleman raised his hat and introduced himself. Jaeger. The visitor reported his name. The pillar of governance, the hand of peace. Mathers nodded in realization. The great name of the preacher is like thunder in the abyss. As a successor, you have done well. Since we're already at each other's throats, there's no need to talk about friendship, Mr. Mathers. Jaeger said coldly, no matter why you fell into the abyss, when you stand in front of the Astronomy Society, you are our enemy. Then how do you plan to defeat me? Mathers smiled and asked calmly, are you going to use your crutch to beat me up? Although I want to consider myself a scholar, in terms of fighting skills, I won't lose to a polio patient. Or are you going to use your preaching and sharp teeth to refute my beliefs? You want me to turn over a new leaf? This kind of plot seems to be very popular in the realm recently. Can you let me experience it? You're probably going to be disappointed. Jaeger shook his head. As the Secretary General of the Central Decision-Making Room of the Director of Governance, I'm not good at fighting with people. I'm only here as a mascot. The people who really want to be your enemy have just arrived. Behind the projection, a rainbow light descended from the sky and disappeared in a flash. The flaming giant stepped out and trampled on the sea beneath his feet. He carried the sword of light that was engraved by a miracle on his shoulder. The blade of the sword scattered a blazing light, as if it was a sun that had been bestowed with a sharp blade. Tyrannical divine power. Colonel Military Officer of the Europa Regional Directorate of Governance, a rank 5 ascendant of the Nordic lineage, the one who was crowned Surtur. Next, a gloomy man in a black robe with a scholar's crown on his head appeared. His eyes were slender, and his expression was harsh and cold, as if he had great dissatisfaction with the world. But with his appearance, it was as if time had suddenly reversed. Even the waves and tides under his feet had become completely different. All the crystal pillars above the sea had shrunk by a large amount in an instant, unable to grow again. Tiny cracks began to appear in the impenetrable defense. On the chest of his black robe, there was a white pagoda-shaped emblem. The scholar's crown, decorated with golden tassels, proved his lofty status. The vice principal from the ivory tower, a scholar of the 32 subjects who was famous for his erudition, and also a ascendant from the celestial genealogy, a rank 5 ascendant of the path of divine marrow. Kronos, the last person who came late, had disheveled hair, as if he had not yet woken up. He was still holding a coffee cup in his hand. When he looked around, his expression was not serious at all. Instead, it was incomparably frivolous and calm. It was as if he was here for an outing. However, he was well-mannered. He bowed slightly to Marth, the old senior. Continuing Academy Junior, Sheikh. The overly young creator nodded to one of the members of the Golden Dawn of Destruction in front of him. Before I was born, you were a famous figure in genetics. I hope you will not be stingy with your guidance on my oceanography. Marth glanced at him with a smile that was not a smile. I'm afraid only you know whether you study oceanography or biology, right? Ahaha. This is too exaggerated. Sheikh casually threw away his coffee cup and was about to exchange a few more pleasantries. However, the vice principal from the ivory tower, the cold Kronos, sneered and directly launched an attack. The wheel of time appeared. Boom! The majestic power collided in the void. The entire crystal prison shook slightly, and cracks appeared, but they quickly healed. Young people nowadays are really scary. Marth smiled calmly. I need to preside over the secret ritual of the double helix. It's inconvenient for me to leave. I'll let the other 2 colleagues do it for me. Accompanied by his words, from the endless abyss above his head, 2 ferocious large stars suddenly appeared. They fell and smashed toward the endless sea. Amidst the extremely violent roars, earth-shattering airwaves spread out in all directions. From this moment on, the war began. Big brother, this is bad. 5 minutes ago, when Huaishur had just found a quiet corner and was trying to communicate with the Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub's horrified roar sounded in his mind. It's over, it's over, it's over, it's over. Hurry up and pack up. Look at a share of the border relics and run. Calm down, my friend. Huaishur sighed helplessly. What kind of storms and waves had he not seen before? Why was he making such a ruckus over a mere book? Perhaps he had not seen much of the world. Could it be that some black-hearted woman has been captured again? I smell it. Golden Dawn. It's definitely Golden Dawn. Beelzebub screamed between the pages in panic. Those traitors are coming. What the hell? Huaishur felt his vision turn black. It was as if he had been hit by a sledgehammer. His brain was shaking violently. His legs turned to jelly, and he could barely stand. Oh my God, this is really bad. He cannot take it anymore. Chapter 420. It was hard to predict the ups and downs of life. Huaishur was still immersed in the joy of having a great harvest just now, but Beelzebub's next step made his heart sink to the bottom. What Huang Jin Li Ming? Why did those lunatics appear when I was having a good night's party? He had boasted that he had been through a lot, but now that a wave really hit him, he could not take it anymore. Unbelievable. Wait, you know about the Golden Dawn? Are you kidding? If it wasn't for those traitors in the Utopian Nation War, Kingdom of Heaven wouldn't have been blown up, Beelzebub urged. Hurry up and run. I'm not afraid of death with a stupid book, but big brother, you have the Book of Destiny. If those traitors see you, you're dead for sure. Hurry up and run. Boom. Accompanied by the roar from afar, An ear-piercing alarm suddenly sounded from inside the astral ship. Beelzebub's crazy messages stopped abruptly. What's wrong? Huaisha was stunned. Why aren't you talking? It's too late. We can't run anymore. Big brother, let's go and eat something good. Can't you say something nice? Huaisha rolled his eyes. He finally felt the feeling of death gradually rising from the depths of his consciousness. It seemed to be hovering around him, making him breathless. Especially that black-hearted woman, Crow, who knew where she had run off to play again. She left him to face this mess alone, weak and helpless. He felt uneasy. Luckily, he had called for reinforcements. Otherwise, he would not even know how he died this time. At this moment, Huaisha was extremely thirsty for power. Time is tight. Let's not chat today. He hurriedly asked Beelzebub, what can you do? You can't even tell? A long string of speechless ellipses flashed across the cover of Steel Technique. After expressing its attitude towards Huaisha's short-sightedness, it proudly stated its superpower in large, bold words. I can speak. Huaisha took a deep breath and tried to keep his smile from twisting. What else? Apart from that, I also know more than 300 segments of Guanco, talk show, mono crosstalk, and selected storytelling. Beelzebub proudly said in Huaisha's consciousness, if you don't believe me, I'll tell you a part of Tonglin. Orton used to love listening to this when he was driving. I'd better send you to see Orton. Huaisha smiled, reached out, opened the car window, and grabbed the book of steel, intending to throw it out. Don't, big brother. I was just joking. Beelzebub immediately panicked. Be careful, be careful. Look outside. As he spoke, the sea in the distance shook. Sharp crystal pillars broke out of the sea with a roar, causing Huaisha to be dumbfounded for a while. It was only after a huge roar that he came to his senses. He seemed to have accidentally come to the set of the Immortals fighting again. What the F***CK is this? Huaisha wanted to flip the table. There was no need for Golden Dawn. Any one of them could just lift their leg and step on them, and they would be done for, okay? Mr. Fan, are you there? Huaisha raised his hand and looked at the bracelet that was given to him. He began to hug his leg skillfully. What happened? The coach's office was attacked. Currently, it's estimated to be Goodnight Society's main priest, Mirando. Ms. A.I. Ching is fine. Andrea is on her way to help. But Amazon is injured and has fallen into the rotten dream. Yensha reported concisely. Currently, I'm taking over the command. The emergency response measures have been activated. Please go to the shelter immediately to maintain order. You'll be in the first echelon of evacuation. By the way, something might have happened to your friend. In the projection, Yuan Zhao slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were blood red, and his arms began to mutate inch by inch. Damn, little brother, why are you so unlucky? Huaisha was dumbfounded. Without hesitation, he ran toward Group 8. In the hallway, a team of Iron Legion soldiers was already in position. They directly surrounded him and ran toward Fallout Shelter Number 7. With the transmission track and ejection device, they landed at the bottom of Stellaris in a dozen seconds. Fallout Shelter Number 7 was also the ejection evacuation center in emergency situations. At this moment, the inside was already in chaos. Hundreds of passengers instantly turned into erosive species under Mirando's catalysis. They began to hunt and kill freely in the crowd. Even though there were many ascendants present, the situation still quickly went out of control, until Huaisha and the Crystallattice squad kicked open the door of the Fallout shelter. He pulled out his axe and directly chopped an erosive species that pounced on a child in half. Huaisha directly threw the child in the pool of blood on the ground. He didn't have time to care if the child was traumatized from the shock. The spear of compassion appeared in his hand, and he swung it horizontally. The scent of irises spread out along with a faint fragrance, causing the legs of the passengers who wanted to rush out to the front to turn to jelly. Then, Huaisha pulled out his pistol and directly pulled the trigger at the ceiling. Astronomy will save you. Don't move. In the roar, the chaotic crowd quieted down for a moment. Then, the Iron Legion soldiers behind Huai sure knelt on the ground, raised their guns, and pulled the trigger at the erosive species in front of them. A round of clean fire took out more than 40 of the corrosive species. After ruthlessly kicking the passengers in front of them to the side, they began to suppress them with an iron fist. If they encountered any passengers that were transformed into erosive species, they would directly kill them. If the transformation was not completed, there was still a possibility of rescue. They would break the legs and feet, add a tranquilizer, and drag them to the back. In just a few minutes, the thousands of people in the shelter had quieted down. There were no longer any strange sounds coming from them, except for Yuan Zhao's sharp screams in the corner. There was also a low sound like a rubber ball being bounced. In Yuan's hand, the Mountain Lord broadsword swept horizontally. The broadsword spined directly and violently slapped Yuan Zhao's head, pushing him into the wall and creating a deep dent. When Yuan Zhao struggled to get up and wanted to rush out again, Yuan raised his hand and slapped again. No matter how Yuan Zhao moved, how he resisted, or what strategy he used, he could not stop Yuan's simple and violent attack. It was a sweep that had been refined to the point of perfection. It was almost flawless. Huaisha almost wanted to clap his hands and cheer for Yuan. Good job. But Huaisha's arrival stunned Yuan. His hand slowed for a moment, and finally, Yuan Zhao, who had fallen into madness, seized the opportunity to stab down with his trident. The spear of compassion stabbed forward. With a sharp bang, Yuan Zhao's movements came to an abrupt halt. Then, Huaisha's gun shook, and the drummer's strength directly passed through the spear of compassion, violently shaking off Yuan Zhao's 10 fingers that were holding the gun. After falling into madness, he even forgot his original skills and experience. He was almost no different from a wild beast. He only had the speed and strength of a second-rank ascendant. Huaisha withdrew the spear of compassion, stepped forward, and casually turned around, sweeping with the hammer of pain. Boom! Yuan Zhao was once again hammered into the wall, and this time, he couldn't be dug out. When Huaisha came back to his senses, he sighed inwardly at how lucky he was. It wasn't that the victory was too thrilling, but that the attack was too smooth, and Yuan Zhao's head was almost cut off. This little brother was too pitiful. Not only was he cursed, he was also almost beheaded. Life was not easy. After dealing with Yuan Zhao, Huaisha threw out the rope of sorrow, and then turned to look at Yuan. Are you guys okay? Yuan still nodded her head in a dignified and reserved manner, but her eyes were somewhat drifting. Behind her, the Lin family's little 19 expressed his gratitude rather intimately. However, Wang Su and the child beside him couldn't help but shrink back a little. Only Feng Chu was still a loss and shocked. He was still immersed in the shocking matter of his goddess suddenly turning into a female Tyrannosaurus Rex, pulling out a sword and beating up his cousin for 15 minutes, and still hadn't reacted. As long as you're okay, I'll take care of the rest. Huaisha casually reached out his hand and ruffled Yuan's hair. After doing so, he realized that his actions weren't quite right, and he awkwardly withdrew his hand. Sorry, it's fine. Yuan only took a step back, her expression calm as she bowed in thanks. I'll leave a Zhao to you. Yes, don't worry. Huaisha was taken aback for a moment, then laughed. I do this all the time, even though he was more of a traitor and a decapitated person. However, treating Yuan Zhao wasn't a problem. He walked in front of Yuan Zhao, lowered his head, and examined his little brother. He couldn't help but inhale sharply. Damn, he was almost dead. How was he going to save him? Parts of his organs had mutated, and his eyes were blood red, indicating that he had been contaminated by origin substances. Apart from the fact that his soul was still intact and was still resisting the nightmares, he was almost completely corrupted. Thanks to the Mountain Lord's broadsword's destructive power against origin substances, Yuan Zhao had already been beaten into a pig's head by his own cousin, but he hadn't completely mutated yet. The fact that he had been corrupted to this extent was because he hadn't suffered enough beatings from society yet. Huaisha sucked in a deep breath. His body began to emit green flames as he raised his hand and slapped Yuan Zhao twice across the face. Tribulation ash, heart poison, border flu, red-eye disease. He poured all of them into Yuan Zhao's mouth. Fighting poison with poison. He was very good at this. After the 2 slaps, Yuan Zhao began to spasm as he began to develop a fever. However, the infection on his arm had been halved. The red light in his eyes began to dim, but he still hadn't woken up. He was still entangled in the nightmare. Huaishir was taken aback. He discovered that the stimulation he had given him wasn't enough. No, Yuan Zhao had been dragged too deeply into the nightmare. He stretched out his hand and felt Yuan Zhao's soul, which was still struggling to move. He couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. His soul was probably already deep enough to see the queen of rotten dreams, right? He hadn't gone crazy yet. This guy's mind was probably even more resilient than he had imagined. It seemed that if he wanted to wake him up, he would need to give him an even more severe stimulation. Huaishir hesitated for a moment, then bent down and picked up a box of origin substance figurines that had been flattened. He picked up the revealing 2D doll and placed it in front of Yuan Zhao. In an instant, the crazed Yuan Zhao's attention was drawn to the figurine. His eyes were filled with desire and greed as saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth. He began to mumble some crazy words about my wife and my favorite. Huaishir helplessly shook his head. He directly broke off one of Yuan Zhao's legs in front of him. It was a loud crack. Yuan Zhao froze in place as he let out a despairing shriek. It worked. Huaishir was overjoyed. He picked up the figurine and began to lick it. He did his best to squeeze out a perverted smile. Your wife is amazing. Yuan Zhao screamed as he struggled furiously. The red light in his eyes quickly dissipated, and 2 streams of tears flowed from his eyes. He cried out in grief, "Cousin, save me!" He had woken up. Chapter 421. Huaishir, Yuan Zhao. In the awkward silence, Yuan Zhao looked around as if he had just woken up from a dream, not knowing what had happened. What's wrong? He looked at Huaishir blankly. Why am I tied up? Why does my face hurt so much? Did someone beat me up? And why is everyone looking at me? Well, it's a long story. Huaishir looked away awkwardly and then quietly kicked the broken figurine hidden behind him a little further away. You were just eroded by the rotten dream. And then, in order to save you, everyone tried everything. I have an impression of it. Yuan Zhao's face was pale. It was like a nightmare. I dreamed that a dark woman climbed up from the sea, like a ghost, and climbed into the Stellaris. At that moment, Huaishir felt a chill in his heart. He heard Yuan Zhao's whisper, full of fear. She seemed to be right next to me. The sharp sound of shattering rang out, one after another, accompanied by a sudden burst of shrill cries. Countless light bulbs shattered in an instant, and darkness descended in an instant. But at that moment, the crooked wall behind Yuan Zhao suddenly outlined a ferocious shadow. Just by looking at it, Huaishir's eyes stung. The appearance of just an afterimage caused countless passengers to scream in extreme fear and madness. The distorted outline on the wall wriggled and disappeared in a flash, outlining a distorted figure riddled with holes, almost breaking out of the wall. The wriggling limbs were only a hair's breadth away from the pale Yuan Zhao. Just a little bit more, and it would be able to enter Yuan Zhao's body. But now, following Yuan Zhao's awakening, the pendant hanging in front of his chest, the half-tiger tally, suddenly let out a dignified roar. A solemn and cold shadow suddenly leaped out from it, bringing with it the smell of blood and smoke. It was just like a divine dragon moving in the sky, biting cold and majestic. The one-armed, white-haired old man rode an old horse, without armor, and his right arm, exposed outside the sleeve, glowed like black iron, holding a halberd in his hand. When he raised his eyes, there was a divine light like lightning. As Tiger Tally roared, the halberd in his hand slashed down and swept across, drawing a line. This line became Heaven Abyss. A chilling aura flowed out from the tip of the halberd, brazenly clashing with the strange palm. Not only did the halberd push back the limb, it even left a terrible wound on it. A wisp of darkness suddenly rose from Yuan Zhao's arm and dissipated with a shriek. With a single strike, the connection between Yuan Zhao and Decaying Dream was forcefully severed. The distorted shadows on the wall quickly dissipated and moved to other places. Before his afterimage disappeared, the old man on the warhorse looked back and instructed Yuan Zhao, "You still lack experience. What are you panicking for? According to your cousin, your sixth uncle is already on his way to look for you. Xiao Yuan, take this." He swung his arm and threw the heavy halberd from thousands of miles away into Yuan's hand. The pattern of Yazi instantly spread from the halberd and covered her hands, adding the divine power of the stigmata relic to her body. At the last moment, he looked back at Huaishur and grinned. "Kid, you're not bad. Come play at home later, bring your horse." The old horse carried him and quickly dissipated. Huaishur finally caught his breath. He lowered his voice and asked Yuan Zhao, "Who was that just now?" "My second grandpa." Yuan Zhao wiped the cold sweat on his face. "Why does my face hurt so much?" "Maybe it's because you had a nightmare?" Huaishur looked at the faint red mark on his face, thought for a moment, and said seriously, "At that time, you seem to have gone crazy. You threw your figurine on the ground and crushed it. You even slapped yourself and cried, saying, 'My cousins don't have this thing, only I have it.' Now that a god like Huaishur has come, even brother Huaishur doesn't have it. It's probably not a good thing. Huaishur, are you lying to me?" Yuan Zhao's eyes were suspicious. "I'm lying to you, but you don't believe me?" Huaishur stared at him in shock. "Otherwise, it's also possible that after you went crazy, you were beaten up by your cousin. After I broke your figurine, you were still crying for your wife and shouting for your cousin to save me in front of your cousin." He asked, "Which one do you want to believe?" Yuan Zhao, who suffered another tragic social death after the incident with manure forking, fell into a daze. He gave up thinking. Seeing his little brother sunk, Huaishur nodded with satisfaction. He pulled down the rope of sorrow, put it away, and nodded to Yuan to say goodbye. Are you leaving so soon?" Yuan was at a loss, not knowing where he was going. "After all, I still have work to do. I have to work overtime if I can't finish it. Right?" Huaishur looked around, leaned closer, and lowered his voice. You didn't shoot the part just now, right? The part where your wife is awesome." Yuan subconsciously glanced at his pocket, then suddenly shook his head. He didn't know if he really didn't shoot it. Huaishur always felt that once it was leaked, his career as an idol would definitely usher in death. However, he didn't care much about this, so it wouldn't be a pity even if he died. However, it was too embarrassing to post it on the internet, so he had to ask. After getting Yuan's guarantee, he breathed a sigh of relief, waved goodbye, and turned to leave. Anyway, there would be a team of cast iron soldiers here to maintain order. They had a weapon that made Huaishur's heart skip a beat, so they would be able to protect themselves if anything happened. Now, he was more and more worried about AI Qing. At this time, shouldn't that woman be arrogantly giving orders? Where did she go now? Don't tell me something really happened to him. She didn't even send him a text message or call him back. Was she so eager to be his slave in her next life that she didn't even want to look at him in this life? Suppressing the faint anxiety and unhappiness, he ran down the corridor. He heard a roar coming from above again. The whole Stellaris suddenly shook violently. Before Huaishur could react, the dome above suddenly shattered, and a seriously injured sublimator smashed down, landing in front of Huaishur's feet. Huaishur almost stepped on his horse's face. "Damn, why are you here?" He lowered his head and stared at Tony in front of him in astonishment. After the horse's face, a lot of blood flowed out. Tony coughed violently and sighed helplessly. It's a long story. 2 minutes ago, on the upper level of the Stellaris, violent tremors continued to spread. The evil dragon roared, and scarlet flames swept across, instantly melting the tottering carriages into sticky juice. What was more threatening was the dancing law of thermodynamics in Andrea's hands. Once the knowledge of a scholar was transformed by the tool of the stigmata, The destructive power it displayed would be beyond imagination. Even sublimators couldn't reach it. But at this moment, as countless bat shadows rose with a bang, the flames were extinguished in an instant. Mirando's strength once again skyrocketed. The decaying dream's illusory vortex suddenly appeared, and a shadow slowly crept out, wrapping around Mirando's body like a sticky limb. It continuously poured the miraculous power of the decaying dream into him. Immediately afterwards, a second shadow, a third shadow. Mirando's strength once again skyrocketed. However, his expression was filled with anger. There was no joy in it at all. This could only prove one thing: that the substitute he had prepared in advance had broken free. Now, the Queen of Decaying Dreams' power had chosen him. Perhaps there wouldn't be any problems in the short term, but in reality, this wasn't a gift from the decaying dream. In fact, this was the last bit of generosity before the dove took over the magpie's nest. Very quickly, as the nightmare in his body grew, his soul would quickly dissolve into the most basic origin substance in the depths of the decaying dream. After fusing with the Queen of Decaying Dreams' power, it would be reforged. At that time, he would still have Mirando's body and soul, but he would probably no longer be the current him. Instead, he would be the temporary host of the Queen of Decaying Dreams, the embodiment of the ruler in the human world. It was impossible to use human logic and common sense to understand the ruler in the depths of the abyss. At the same time, the ruler of the primal chaos wouldn't be able to understand humans, who were as insignificant as dust. They themselves were a kind of symbol, a kind of phenomenon, a kind of essence condensed from the abyss. Chapter 422. At this moment, a ferocious shadow silhouette constantly appeared in the air, constantly changing shape. It randomly stirred the tentacles around its body, and thousands of eyes appeared and disappeared in the air without any warning. It was impossible to see its true appearance with the naked eye. However, anyone with consciousness would be able to sense that something terrifying, like death, like a nightmare, had arrived. The shadow danced and swept. In an instant, Andrea flew out, smashing through layers of the cabin and landing in the burning ruins. Mold and distortion quickly emerged from her arms, spreading upward and climbing up her face. It wasn't even a blow. The dying ruler, the Queen of Rotten Dreams, who had lost her dream and her body, didn't even notice the attacker. She twitched as if she had been bitten by a mosquito. She reacted instinctively. Andrea, on the other hand, was completely defeated. She was heavily injured and had difficulty breathing. She didn't even have time to get up from the ruins. She struggled to take out a syringe gun from her pocket, but she didn't even have the strength to hold it firmly. The syringe gun loosened and fell to the ground. In a trance, she heard someone rush over, pick up the syringe gun, press it against her neck, and pull the trigger. 40 milligrams of gray liquid medicine was injected into her blood vessels along with the intense pain. It spread along with the soul-tearing pain. Her body spasmed violently, curled up, and twitched. Soon, the mold peeled off, the distortion solidified, and no longer spread. Hello? Hello? Andrea? The person pressed her pulse and waved in front of her eyes. Can you see me? Are you okay? She raised her head with difficulty and opened her eyes. She finally saw the face in front of her. AI Ching. Go! She struggled to push away AI Ching's hand and urged in a hoarse voice. Don't worry about me. Rotten dreams have come. Where do you plan to escape to? A mocking voice sounded from outside the broken cabin. The reborn Mirando rose from the shadows and looked down at her. He said, Ladies, you have nowhere to run. AI Ching raised her hand expressionlessly and snapped her fingers. In an instant, the broken deck quickly closed up and turned into a pair of metal hands that grabbed at Mirando. Following the whistling sound, the 6 cannon modules were all in place, switching to the origin bombs that were specifically designed to deal with the sublimators. They began to wildly bombard the sublimators. When Mirando made his move, the iron-casting army surrounded him from both sides. They raised their shields and stood between AI Ching and Mirando, instantly forming a solid defense. Tony, who had finally arrived, carried Andrea and began to cover AI Ching's retreat. Evacuate? AI Ching stood still and looked back at him. Where can we go now? Don't you understand? The Stellaris is our base, our battlefield. We have no place to retreat. What about your safety? Tony glared at her. If you stay here, you'll die. Compared to 110,000 people, is a woman's safety really that important? AI Ching looked at him indifferently. Don't make me repeat myself. Go do what you need to do, Tony. I'll stay here and do what I need to do. The Dark Origin Army's Lurker and Yinshur will cooperate with you. I'll leave Mirando to you. Understood. Tony didn't say anything else. After handing Andrea over to the medics, he decisively pulled out his twin blades. He glanced at her one last time before turning around and sprinting towards Mirando. As he sprinted, illusory figures constantly appeared behind him. It was as if there were ghosts hidden in the air following him. Countless figures spread out. The illusory ghosts passed through the walls, explosions, and Yinshur's attacks. They appeared in front of Mirando as if they were invisible and launched an attack. Even if it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, he was still firmly pinned in place. Tony's body began to rapidly expand. In the end, as the wind and frost began to swirl around him, he completely transformed into a 3-meter-tall giant. Even the rubber mask on his head began to swell. He had not used his full strength in a long time, and he was intoxicated by this sudden increase in strength. He roared with all his might. So strong. Boom! Dracula's hand of darkness swept across, and Tony was sent flying backward. The dual blades in his hands were shattered, but then the frost giant climbed up from the ruins, and the crack in his chest quickly healed under the spreading frost. It was as if he was immortal. His eyes emitted a burning red light, and he roared as he charged towards the invincible enemy once again. As Tony left, AI Ching and the Iron Cast Army's position began to sink rapidly. It was like a huge elevator platform. With a roar, dozens of elevators instantly descended from the sky. They were filled with soldiers of the Iron Cast Army. They smashed through the walls, crushed the deck, and reassembled in the middle of the Stellaris. And in the center of the rapidly expanding, huge square, the formless rotten dream finally outlined its own form in the material. No, if that was called a form, it would be too strange. Under the blazing light of dozens of searchlights, it was actually unable to disperse the strange shadow that lingered in the center. The laws of physics were invalid in this space. Countless broken bricks and iron pieces floated in the air, and twisted rails and steel frames pierced out of the ground without warning. They constantly bent into various strange arcs and intertwined together. And when countless moving fragments and steel frames moved under the dazzling light, they would project a distorted and bloated shadow on the wall. It seemed to be a woman. Wearing a gorgeous long dress, she walked in the despicable mortal world. It was already riddled with holes. The fragments continued to rise and fall, twisting and changing. In accordance with the interference from a higher power, the image of the ruler descended into the mortal world. In the projection on the wall, under the protection and encirclement of countless sticky tentacles, the deformed woman's silhouette grew thousands of twisted eyes. Her eyes glanced around randomly, ferocious and cold. She still cared about the little bugs that surrounded her. She didn't care. She took a step forward. At the same time, AI Ching took a deep breath and suppressed the fear in her heart. Everyone, prepare for overload mode. Then, the sound of steel rubbing against each other rang out one after another. That was the sound of countless cumbersome modules ejecting from the exoskeleton. First, it was the outermost external ammunition supply, the secondary weapons, the main weapons, and then the thickest armor. Then, all the unnecessary steel frames fell off from the members of the Iron Casting Legion. But after removing the sealed armor, what appeared in front of the ruler was not flesh and blood, but countless, surging molten iron, the outline of a human formed by the hot steel solution. That was a displacement from alchemy. As early as the first day of service, the matrix had been implanted into the bones of every member of the Legion. At this moment, under the command of the commander, the violent power at the bottom was awakened. They had truly become killing machines. The success of the iron-casting Legion did not rely on armor and weapons, but on themselves. Now, the iron-casting Legion followed the edict and ushered in the once-in-a-lifetime alchemy transformation. They burned their own weak flesh and blood and ran there between the runes of alchemy and the laws of the Creator. Only the most resolute will and the deepest desire would be able to survive the excruciating pain of destruction. Only in this way could steel be cast. Sharp sounds burst out, one after another. The hot molten iron cooled rapidly, turning into a pitch-black and rough form. The 2,100 members of the iron-casting Legion stretched out their hands in unison. Boiling iron blood flowed out of their hands, forming heavy blades. In alchemy, the ashes returning nail was extracted from the bottom layer of the framework. It let out a high-pitched cry, welcoming the arrival of a strong enemy. There was no need for any more words. Following the commander's command, the iron-casting Legion trampled on the ground and launched an attack on the invincible ruler. Then, when everyone was fighting with their lives on the line, you lost face like crazy? Huaishir was in disbelief after hearing the whole story. You're such a noob. At the very least, I was of some use, all right? Do you know what an intermission is? Tony was so angry that blood spurted out of his mouth. Besides, you're just a leecher. What right do you have to criticize others? Because I have a sincere heart. Huaishir was talking to Tony crazily, but his hands were busy. After giving Tony emergency treatment, he directly raised his hand and poured the life force of the mountain ghost directly into Tony's body. Tony's life was finally hanging by a thread. A cluster of weeds could be seen rapidly growing out of the horse's mouth. Then, as Tony's mouth chewed under the hood, it was pulled back and swallowed into his stomach. The taste is not bad. You already have weeds. Can you grow some corn next time? You finally got me. Huaishir was dumbfounded and thought for a long time. I'll try next time. Don't try next time, Huaishir. Run quickly. Tony forced his body that was about to break into two halves. Frost froze at the crack, and he was whole again. Go to the shelter or hide somewhere else. Run, Huaishir. Run. You'll be fine, at least before we fall. Huaishir was dumbfounded. Hey, are you going to die? Sometimes, it's part of the job to die. Huaishir, is the slogan of the Astronomy Society protecting the world just for fun? Tony chuckled and patted his shoulder. In the future, when all the big brothers are still alive, it's not time for a 17-year-old kid to go to the battlefield. Before he could finish acting cool, blood spurted out of his mouth. Swinging his horse face in a streak of blood, he fell on his back. He could not get up again. He was like an arrow at the end of its flight. No, big brother. I haven't been cool for more than 3 minutes. Huaishir panicked too. He hurriedly made a handful of silver blood potion to mend Tony's wounds and at least keep him alive. Before he could say anything, he heard Beelzebub's crazy shout in his consciousness. Warning, attack is coming. Emergency maneuver. Even the premonition of death did not react. Without thinking, Huaishir carried Tony and ran, used steps. Almost at the same time, a dark figure descended from the sky and smashed through the layers of the cabin. The floor where Tony had been standing was directly pierced through by an arm and torn apart. Mirando descended from the sky and raised his head expressionlessly. Now, half of his body was char-black, and there was a big hole in his chest that could not be healed. His eyes were filled with a scarlet light that Huaishir was very familiar with. Thirst for blood. He was already heavily injured, and his stomach was rumbling with hunger. Chapter 423. 2. Mirando licked his lips and murmured greedily. 2 is even better. It wasn't until he saw Huaishir and developed killing intent towards her that Huaishir's sense of death rose up madly in her consciousness. What surprised him even more was that Beelzebub reacted so quickly. I'm Osiris's radar control program. What do you think? Beelzebub quickly replied. What are you waiting for? Run, bro. He's going to eat you. Literally, that's right. Huaisher saw Mirando open his mouth and grin. Sharp canine teeth slowly grew out, and Dracula shadows spread in all directions. Run to the east. Yinshir's cover is taking shape over there. There's another team rushing here. Go, go, go. Without hesitation, Huaisher began to change his strategy. Run. Behind him, a dark torrent swept over. Huaisher only saw a blur. Instantly, a slender figure appeared from the darkness and appeared in front of him. Its wriggling limbs swept across. It was like a sharp blade slashing. Damn, I almost forgot that this bastard can teleport. Under the reflection of the mirror of nothingness, the premonition of death solidified, piercing Huaisher's eyes until they hurt. Without thinking, he raised the sword of virtue to block in front of him. Immediately after, he was sent flying backwards. Before he landed, his arm was cleanly broken into two. He could not even hold the sword. He should not have said that Tony was a noob. He did not expect that his damage output was not that good either. His heart was filled with regret. But his hands did not stop. He threw out 2 alchemy bombs in front of him, trying to slow down Mirando's steps. Then, without warning, he changed direction and rushed into the room next door. Before he could see the furnishings in the room clearly, a slender figure flashed out of the darkness, wriggling 5 fingers grabbing at his face. Huaisher did not even have time to take a deep breath before he fell on his back. Iron Bridge. He felt that his waist was about to break. He almost threw Tony to the ground, too. Behind you, Beelzebub reminded him and directly transferred the image into his mind, showing him the full picture. Behind Huaisher, in his shadow on the floor, Mirando's pale face suddenly appeared. He raised his hand and stabbed at the nearby Huaisher. This time, Huaisher didn't care about his own movements. He suddenly rolled to the side like a dog, narrowly avoiding the attack. Mirando became even more furious. 4 times in a row, he missed all 4 times. It was as if he was facing a damned claw machine. He couldn't care less about preserving Huaisher and the others. With a furious roar, he transformed into a swarm of bats that covered the sky and covered the earth and flew towards them. It's over. Huaisher felt a chill at the back of his head. He hesitated to throw Tony out as a shield. However, when she thought about how this fellow was still thinking about protecting her even though he was about to die, she couldn't help but sigh deeply and stand in front of Tony. Then, he took out Lord of the Flies from his pocket and stood in front of the bats. "Wait, what are you doing?" Beelzebub shouted angrily. "Bastard, I'm your half-brother. How can you do this to me? You're about to die, and you're still slacking off, you bastard." Huaisher scolded him in his mind. "I don't ask to be born in the same year, month, and day, but I ask to die in the same year, month, and day. Let's go together today and fulfill your brother's dream on the road to hell." In this almost frozen moment, Beelzebub symbolically struggled twice. He couldn't help but sigh. "I'm not slacking off, little brother. If I really do work, can you handle it? Now that things have come to this, do I have a choice whether I can handle it or not?" The bats in the dark were about to reach Huaisher. His face was pale with fright. "If you have any work to do, hurry up and do it." "Okay, that's what you said." At his fingertips, Lord of the Flies suddenly shook. The Book of Steel shook violently, as if its core hub had been opened. Instantly, countless parts rose and shrank from it. The modules were transferred, the composition changed, the origin substance was loaded, and the soul was identified. The cold and deep voice echoed in Huaisher's mind. Danger source detected. Abyssal contamination detected. Osiris armor activated. Insufficient origin substance. Activation failed. Hand of Osiris manifesting. Origin substance replenished. Emergency stop. Eye of Osiris ready to lock on. Orbital strike in progress. No deep space border satellite detected. Orbital strike failed. In an instant, almost 100,000 reports rang in Huaisher's mind, one after another. His head was about to explode. In a trance, he only heard the last few sentences. Styx 2 exoskeleton module, not detected. Heat source weapon sword of Horus, not detected. Emergency search, emergency search, emergency processing module online, super miniature judgment machine emit, installation complete. In the frozen time, countless steel modules that were flipping up and down finished shrinking in an instant. At this moment, the book of steel in Huaishi's hand had turned into a heavy revolver. On the handle of the revolver, the relief of the crocodile head god slowly lit up and opened its mouth. Huaishi's vision turned black, and his face became so pale that it was transparent. There was no more blood. More than half of his blood was drawn away by this strange revolver, followed by almost all the origin substance, and even all the negative energy and poison in his body. The greedy revolver violently swallowed Huaishi's everything. The huge vitality belonging to the mountain ghost was quickly drained, almost to the bottom. Even the origin substance reserves in his pouch, which were 3 times the amount, had been completely emptied. It was as if it wanted to swallow him as well. A crisp click sounded from the cartridge and echoed in Huaishi's mind. Then, a bullet appeared in the empty cartridge. It was as if it was carved out of lapis lazuli, crystal clear and intoxicating. Subconsciously, Huaishi pulled the trigger. Then, he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't see anything anymore. He couldn't even feel his left hand holding the gun. At that moment, thousands of thunderbolts burst out from the barrel at the same time. At the same time, there was a terrifying light that was enough to burn all eyes. Huaishi almost suspected that he was holding the main cannon of a war chariot in his hand. But now, a terrifying recoil comparable to that of a war chariot's cannon came from his hand. He could almost imagine the bones in his right hand shattering inch by inch, and the blazing light that roared out from the barrel. Light tore everything apart. At that moment, the whole world seemed to have fallen into silence. In the frozen time, the sharp light of judgment gushed out and tore through the darkness with irresistible force, like a child tearing a piece of paper in his hand. Under the detection of the radar, it locked onto the shadow at the core of the countless bats. It burned the countless bats in front of it and completely penetrated the domain formed by Dracula. Then, like a red-hot needle, it pierced out from the other side. It still moved forward, and forward again. After burning a hole as thick as a bucket in all the deck and armor, it roared out and penetrated the astral from bottom to top. Then it flew out of the astral in an unruly manner, soaring alone in the wind and flying out of the endless abyss. Layers of double spiral crystal pillars were penetrated by the light of judgment from the inside out. After leaving a penetrating mark as thick as an index finger, it finally dissipated in the refraction of layers of crystals. It was like a grand firework. Only countless burning marks were left, proving that it had been here. The Supremes who were fighting outside the battlefield looked back in shock. What was that? When Huaishi's vision was no longer white, he saw the darkness that was frozen in midair. By the time his ears had gotten rid of the buzzing noise, he heard Mirando's furious roar. The miraculous imprint of Dracula trembled in rage and quickly shrank. Retreat. As countless charred bats fell from the sky, in the darkness, a broken body slowly condensed and let out a painful cry. My face! On his face, there was a big charred hole. After swallowing his left eye, cheekbone, and even eyebrow, it pierced out from the back of his head, leaving a big hollowed-out hole. His whole face was burned into charcoal, and sticky blood kept oozing out with a sizzling sound. My face! He screamed sharply, covered his badly damaged face, and looked angrily at Huaishi. Then he saw the pistol in his hand that had been burned red. What was that thing? He couldn't hide his fear. It was just a shot, but it was able to severely damage his divine mark. Even Dracula's immortal attribute was burned into ashes without any resistance. However, no matter what it was, he probably couldn't use it a second time. He gasped violently, tore off the charred flesh and skin on his face, revealing broken bones and wriggling flesh. He stared at Huaishi's with his only scarlet eye. "Little bastard, I'm going to tear you into pieces." Bang! Suddenly, a walking stick was raised diagonally. An elegant middle-aged gentleman appeared from the void and blocked in front of him. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Mirando." Marth looked back at his stunned ally and smiled helplessly. "Can you give me some face and let me talk to this, Mr. Huaisher of the Astronomy Club?" Mirando's expression suddenly twitched as if he was about to curse. The violence and anger in his only eye could not be concealed. But under Marth's calm gaze, the uncontrollable anger gradually subsided. Or rather, he didn't dare to burst out. "Just a little while will do." Martha smiled and glanced at a place not far away. "Besides, isn't food everywhere?" Mirando's hands suddenly clenched. In the silence, he slowly took a step back, and then another step back. He roared angrily, and countless bats rose and disappeared into the darkness. He had left. The strong enemy had retreated. But Huaisher didn't have the slightest bit of hope. Or rather, he was already dead. The moment this old bastard appeared, for words appeared in his mind. Yellow gold, Li Ming. Countless ways to die appeared in his mind. If that guy found out that he had the Book of Destiny, he would probably die 1,000,000 times. But unexpectedly, before he could say anything, the pistol in his hand quickly shrank and turned into the steel book, Lord of the Flies. Accompanied by the vibration of the pages, a roaring sound was heard. "Marth, you bastard!" Beelzebub couldn't suppress his anger and yelled, "How dare you appear in front of me? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."